Calling the meeting to order, December 8, 2020. That's 1 o'clock, and this is the superintendent's workshop. And our illustrious superintendent is in attendance, so I'm going to turn the meeting over to him.
Thank you, Mr. Barefoot. Today we do have a number of items. It's almost a joint agenda. The first item will be a legislative update and conversation, followed by school board protocols and procedures. That was an item in which I'll turn it back to the board to have conversations and dialogue regarding the creation of systems or structures or procedures as we norm with a new board to ensure that we're conducting our meetings and our interactions in a way that each and every single member of our community can be completely proud of. Followed by school board FSBA training, their opportunity to identify training. We have a training remaining, and then a quick conversation or ask for guidance from the board regarding master board training. So I have an update regarding that particular area. We will then move into a review of our policies. I will prep that over and turn it to the board. And then the last item will be an update on executive order from the Department of Education that was just released, as well as an update on our health and safety measures that we have taken over the last several months. There's been a volume of work done, and I'm looking forward to providing an update to the board. The first item on the agenda is an item that I think is timely. So we have been working with Rutledge Yesenia for quite some time. And I have done some research because I've had access to the information that they have provided, as well as other staff members on our team. But I struggled when we went through the creation of priorities for our board, legislative priorities, on creating or enhancing this relationship. So in problem solving with this organization, I think there are opportunities to enhance and expand this relationship and offer or proffer some of those services that are provided to me through to the board. And previous administration, there was a straight line in the sand in which the board did not have access to this information or these services. And in speaking to some of you, it was brought to my attention that we weren't aware that we had those services. And this is an opportunity to receive information from this organization, as well as create a system that works for us, not for us, meaning me as your new superintendent and you as a new board. How do we create a relationship with the services that have been provided to ensure they're tailored to meet our specific needs? So I'm looking forward to this presentation, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Bass at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Happy to be able to bring this presentation to you. Rutledge Yesenia, I have worked with since 2012 while in Glades County. They represented the Heartland Educational Consortium, and we wanted to bring this today so we could have them give you a brief overview of what their services are, and then also go into the upcoming legislative session as where things are at and give us an update, and then obviously have questions and answers for them or whomever. So Jessica, it's good to see you, even if it is on camera. And I'm not even going to, I've known you for all these years and I can never get your last name right, so I'm not even going to try it.
That is perfectly all right. It is a mouthful. Hi, I am Jessica Janisiewicz, and I believe that my colleague, Jim Hamilton, may also be joining us. And so if he does, if there's a way to bring him in, that would be great as well. I will share my screen quickly and get started if that's all right. Okay.
We have a screen of Suzanne, just so you're aware.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not right, but okay. There we go. All right. Can you all see that now?
No, Jessica, we still don't see it. There it is. Now we see it.
Oh, okay. Apologize for that. So I wanted to run through, as they stated, what some of our services are, since we do have new leadership and new folks in the district and a potential to really change and grow this relationship, which I'm really excited about. So I wanted to start just with some basic information about what we offer. We provide weekly reports during the committee weeks in session that detail all of the actions that the legislature takes and any bill content. We also then at the end of the session provide a written summary and analysis of all the legislation. We do the same with budget reports. So that is an area where we have been working and continue to work all throughout the year when it is not session. We provide information about, of course, the budget that they build, but then also any ongoing budgetary concerns dealing with revenue estimating conferences, obviously recently with the pandemic and its dramatic impact on our economy here in Florida. So we provide guidance and an analysis of those issues as well. So most recently, we've been sharing our revenue estimates, providing updates so that everyone can see, okay, this is where we are, this is where we thought we would be pre-pandemic, what the budget was built on, here's what the actual revenues have been, this is what it may mean for the budget. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but excuse me, that's some of our services. We also follow all the capital outlay, FEFP issues, any of those things, and provide information on that as well. We provide daily emails. It's our newsy system that is just a compilation of important news stories surrounding education. By we, I mean myself and my team, primarily Jim Hamilton, who works with me on the budget. We meet with other lobbyists. Both Jim and I are former presidents of FEL, which is the Florida Education Legislative Liaisons group. That is a group of education lobbyists from other school districts that meet once a week during committee weeks in session to talk about shared ideas and ways and issues and ways in which we can work together, as well as, of course, FADS and FSBA and other groups. We also provide copies of House and Senate bills, agendas, the committee bills, staff analysis, any of that information that you need to staff and anyone else who needs it when it comes to trying to implement whatever legislation there is, as well as to give you an idea of what's coming and provide input to us as to what impact that would have on the district. We, of course, monitor all House and Senate education committees and any other committees that may have topics of interest for education. For example, there has been some talk about potential changes to the FRS system. This has come and gone over many, many years. That wouldn't necessarily flow through the education committees, but we do follow those issues as well because they would impact the district and staff. And of course, we watch for legislation and alert you all when things are filed that we believe are important and will impact the district. We do hold weekly conference calls during session with either the superintendent staff, superintendent's designee, to talk through what has happened in the past week and what we expect to be coming in the current week, to get impact from staff, input from staff, to give us information about the impact of various policies as well as the budget as it's being developed on the district. As I noted, we offer year-round budget information, and we do communicate via email or telephonically. That really is a personal preference for whomever we're communicating with. When there is important information that emerges very quickly, of course, during the legislative session, particularly in the final days, things happen very fast. It tends to be bills, we batted back and forth between the House and the Senate, and it's just a matter of even minutes sometimes. So we usually have a point person that we communicate with any of those important issues. And then we communicate in whatever way superintendent or his or her designee thinks would be best for the district. So we're happy to work with you all as to what that looks like. If we would like to grow the relationship, we do offer more services beyond what I just stated. We can come down to the district and identify some long-term and short-term priorities and objectives, work on the legislative platform and how we will implement it. We can work with district leaders we sometimes will come down maybe at the end of session, explain what legislation passed, and really work directly with staff when it comes to the implementation of those issues. And then, of course, looking at district priorities. If there are certain specific issues to Indian River that you'd like to work on. We, of course, could work with the school board and superintendent. If you come up to Tallahassee, I know sometimes individuals will come up for either FSBA or FAD's legislative days, or separately on your own. We can help set meetings and work with you there. And we can work with the School Boards Association and Central Florida School Boards Coalition to develop any of their priorities that may align with yours, and then present legislative updates and any workshops on request. So not just the implementation of bills, but then also looking at the budget and ways in which we can help with that development there. And then if you have a point person at the district who's a government relations person, we can work directly with them to support any efforts both at the state level and even locally, should that come to be, and work with other government officials. So not just our state delegation, but of course other folks in the department and State Board of Ed and all of those branches of government, the governor's office as well, and we can work with them on your behalf. So turning to a legislative update, I wanted to give you all just an idea of where we are and what we're looking at for the 2021 session, which is going to be upon us very soon. Of course, we just had an election about a month ago, and the results were that the Republicans increased their majority in both the Florida Senate and the House. In the Senate, they increased by 1 seat, in the House by 5. Practically speaking, that will not change very much. In Tallahassee, the Republicans have had control of both of those chambers for many years now. The one small difference that it may make in the Senate is that there are now enough Republicans in the majority in the Senate to pass constitutional amendments. Those are the amendments that we find on the ballot that then go to the voters for their yay or nay vote. The past 2 years, the Republicans did not have enough in the majority, not enough members in the majority to pass those on a straight party line vote. They would have to have a Democrat come and vote with them. So not many of those passed in the last 2 years, but they now have that number again. So those constitutional amendments that we have seen from time to time that come from the legislature, of course, we also have some that come from groups that organize and get enough signatures, but the ones that come from the legislature, we may see more of those this year now that they have that stronger majority. So it's 24 Republicans, 16 Democrats in the Senate, 78 Republicans, and 42 Democrats in the House. House leadership, of course, has changed now that we're in a new 2-year cycle with our leadership. The House Speaker is Chris Sprowls. He is out of the Pinellas County area. He is a lawyer by trade. His Speaker pro tem is Brian Oliva from Miami-Dade. The Majority Leader is Representative Grant. He's out of Charlotte County. Our big appropriations chair is going to be Representative Trumbull, who's out of Bay County. That's up here in the Panhandle. And then importantly for us, our House Education Committee chair is going to be Representative Chris Latvala, who's also from Pinellas County. He and House Speaker Sprowls have known each other a very long time, obviously come from the same part of the state and are very close. So we had figured that Rep Latvala would have an important role to play. And in fact, he is our policy chair. What is important to note about the House Education Committee structure is it is going to be a little different in these next 2 years. So last year we had 1 subcommittee, and then in years past we've had maybe 2. The Speaker has announced that he is going to have 3 subcommittees under the House Education Committee. And it's important to note this because this gives us a good idea as to where the Speaker would like to focus his policy and any changes that he would like to see. What he has decided to do is have 3 subcommittees that each focus on different ages, for lack of a better term, in the education process. The first is going to be an early learning and elementary education committee. So that committee will be charged with looking at any of our early learning programs, VPK, as well as any elementary education issues will take place in that committee. The second committee is going to be the Secondary Education and Career Development Committee, and they're interested in looking at the ways in which high school programs can then lead and transition into careers. So for those kids who don't choose to go on to college, they may choose to earn a certificate and begin working in a trade or other technical program. We know we do a lot in public schools to help develop that. They're looking to even grow that further And so that is the focus of that committee. And then the last committee will be the post-secondary education and lifelong learning committee. That's going to be our higher ed focused committee. We do not know the chairman for those committees of our subcommittees just yet. They have not announced that in the House, but we will certainly let you know when that takes place. On the Senate side, we also have new leadership. We have Senate President Wilton Simpson, who is from the Pasco County, Central Florida area. The President Pro Tem, which is the second in command, is Senator Bean. He's from the Jacksonville area. Our Rules Committee Chair, which is a very powerful committee, is Senator Pasadomo, and she is next in line to be Senate President. So when these 2 years are over, she will be the next Senate President, assuming that the Republicans maintain power, which certainly seems like they will based on the past election. The minority leader is Senator Farmer out of Broward County, and the minority leader pro tem is Senator Powell from Palm Beach. And they have, on the Senate side, announced their committee chair and vice chairs. The committees stay relatively more, they tend to stay the same on the Senate side, particularly in the education world. We don't have a lot of switch ups there. And our Education Policy Committee, the chair is going to be Senator Gruters, who is from the Charlotte and Sarasota area. And his vice chair is going to be Senator Chev Jones, who is a newly elected senator from the Broward County area. If you have been involved with anything when it comes to education policy, you will recognize his name because he was a member of the House previously and was very active on our education committees in previous years. Our Education Budget Committee, our chair is Senator Broxson, who is from Escambia County, again here in the Panhandle area, and the vice chair is Senator Diaz, who was our Policy Committee chair for the last 2 years. He's someone who's been very involved in education in the Senate, but then also in his time when he was a representative over in the House. He was served as chairs of the education committees at that time as well. Something that obviously has been very important and just came out last week was the new executive order that is going to govern the next semester. We have been waiting for that. There was some talk that perhaps it would even come out before Thanksgiving. And we were all anxious to see what it was going to do because it's been very important to keep the funding stable and to try to make the school's year as problem-free as possible. And I know I say that knowing that this has been a very challenging year, but the executive order essentially does a lot of what the first executive order did and keeps very much the same. It continues the options, so that virtual option that you are offering some students, that can continue and you will continue to be funded for it. The brick and mortar option, of course, has to remain in place. They want to encourage students who want to go back to school to be able to do so. It continues to require that we offer full services to students and that we do public monitoring to make sure that the students are in fact continuing to learn. It added a few pieces, and one of those being that a requirement that districts notify parents if their students are falling behind. So if they are in the virtual option and perhaps they are not participating enough or they are just not being very successful in that model, districts have to tell parents that that is the case, and those students will be required to come back to the brick and mortar school unless their parents opt to keep them in the virtual option after having been given this information. So the parents have to be notified, they need to know where their students are, and then if they choose to keep them in that virtual option, it is with the knowledge that their student is in fact falling behind, and they would still make that choice, you know, for personal family reasons as to why they may choose to do that. The funding stability that we have had will continue, which is great news, but there are some shifts there as well because we have had some districts that have actually seen an increase in students over what their projections were. Of course, many districts have seen a reduction in students, but there have been some that have seen an increase. And understandably, those districts would like to be funded for the students that they are serving. So this order will allow those districts that have seen the increases over projections to in fact be funded for those students. And then for the districts that have lost students, they have spread it over all of the state in such a way, those losses, that the losses are much smaller than they would normally be. So you may see a decrease, but you are not seeing the huge decrease that could in fact have happened had we gone right back to the way we normally operate. And this will carry us through the spring semester of 2021, with the hope that when we enter the fall of 2021, we can be back to a more normal education model that we are all used to. So as we look to the 2021 legislative session, there are some things, of course, that are on our minds that we know we are going to be working on. First and foremost is the budget, always, of course, and there were certainly some concerns there because we know that revenues are down due to the pandemic. That being said, I do want to note from about August on, the funds that have come in over the pandemic projections. So the budget, the budget that we are operating under right now was obviously built pre-pandemic. It passed in the middle of March before we were really in the throes of this. And it was built on a much larger number of revenues than what we of course have seen because everything basically shut down in mid-March and shut down for a couple of months. So for those first couple of months, March, April, May, we saw tremendous losses in revenue. And that was very worrisome as to what would it mean for this budget and then what this would do to our economy long term. The revenue estimating group got together and came out with new numbers once we started being in the throes of the pandemic so that we could have a better sense of what the revenue would actually be and not based on what it was pre-pandemic. And the good news is from August on, their projections we have exceeded. And that is wonderful news. The economy seems to, at least right now, be improving at a much faster rate than what the estimators had thought in the summer when we initially saw the losses. So we know we will be down. You know, we are still not to that robust economic growth that we were experiencing pre-pandemic, but it may not be as bad as we thought it once was going to be. That's one of the reasons we follow these revenue estimating conferences and provide that information to you, because it gives us and you an idea of what the budget will look like for next year before they actually start building it. So every month we get a little closer to knowing what their number that they're going to be looking at is, and that helps us to determine what we think education can expect to get based on historical information. We also have heard a great deal of talk about federal funds. There's been talk about another stimulus that of course is they've continued to kind of delay on, but there seems to be some consensus that there will be another stimulus. What will that mean? Will there be money that goes directly to districts? Will there be money that goes to the state to help fill any gaps? We're not entirely sure, but we know that if there is some sort of stimulus, that will absolutely impact the budget one way or another. I did want to also mention that during the organizational session here in Tallahassee, which occurred a week after the election, and that was when our House and Senate members come up and are sworn into office, the Senate president made some comments about education and the fact that the education budget has grown so tremendously, I believe he said in the last 10 years or so. We were unclear what numbers he was working from. We went back and looked at the budget and we just can't seem to find that. But either way, it is important for us to keep in mind when those types of things are said by leadership, we understand that that may be something that they're looking at. He did in later comments talk about projects, which we see throughout the budget. This is everything from, you know, some group wants a building to a special project in a local community. And there are millions and millions and millions of dollars in the budget for those types of projects. And he did seem to indicate that he wanted to look at that. and perhaps make some changes there. So it may be a year where we don't see quite as many projects. And that may be a way that he tries to get more funds. But I just wanted to point that out since he did say that during his press availability. Of course, as I said, our number one issue in the budget for the session is the budget. And I will let, if Jim is on, I'll let him just give a few comments about that. Is Jim on? I'm sorry, since I can't see.
Yes, I am.
Hi, Jim. Do you want to give a few comments about the budget?
A few comments are, we still are far from knowing much about it. The governor's budget, we first look after the DOE's legislative budget request, which came out a month or so ago. And right now, the indicators are that if we had a continuation budget, that would be progress in the face of adversity.
Yes. Thank you, Jim. It is definitely challenging time. So I did also include here about instructional materials funds. The reason I wanted to note that is we are of course moving to the new BEST standards. And this year is the the purchase for the new reading program, which will be under the new standards. Since the standards will have changed, there's obviously even more of a need for those new materials so that what you are working on accurately reflects what the students will be studying and then assessed on. As you all, I'm sure, are well aware, reading and math are the most expensive purchases. They're the largest, and we have them right in a row. This year, reading, and then math next year. So there's a special focus on instructional materials funds. We have, of course, been down in that categorical for, I think, since the recession, when cuts were initially made, and we've never really gotten back to our high water mark. And of course, we've added students, and nothing has gotten cheaper in that interim period. So what you have been able to purchase as a district has continued to shrink unless you add other funds from other sources. So that is something we are going to be looking at. The governor did use some of the federal money that he got, and he was able to direct that to certain things. And so there is a chance that if there's another stimulus, perhaps he will designate, and he's given that kind of money again, he could designate it for that purpose. So we'll be watching that. Obviously, we're also looking at the policy responses to the pandemic, particularly when it comes to accountability measures. We don't expect anything to change with regard to testing here in Florida. We expect that program to continue. What remains to be seen is all of those measures that are in place with regard to school grades, teacher evaluations, all those sort of things. Will we have to still have that same program in place, knowing that we have had a very volatile education for many kids beginning from March of last year, and in some cases carrying on into the spring semester. So we'll look and see if the legislature and or the executive branch chooses to take any steps there in that direction. They certainly could. As I mentioned before, career and technical education growth and support, we expect that. We are hearing that from both the House and the Senate as something we want to work on, as is early learning and pre-K. There have been bills from folks in your area for the last couple of years to look at pre-K and early learning programs. Some of the challenges that have been there is, of course, cost and trying to fund any kind of changes or any kind of real accountability. Then you have to kind of think about the funding there and who's paying for what. So it's a challenging issue, but a very important one, as we all know. When students come into kindergarten prepared from a high quality VPK program, they are in much better state to learn than those who are coming in with no experiences at all. So we have been looking at that. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the implementation of the BEST standards, we're going to continue on that path with the department providing guidance in that way. Some important dates just to consider. Our committee meetings will begin in January. There are 2 committee weeks in January, 3 in February, and then March 2nd, regular session will convene. The slated day for the end of session is April 30th of this year. We'll see if that happens. We've gone a little longer in the last couple of years, so there's certainly a possibility for that again this year, especially considering the budget challenges. And then this year is a year where we have the committee weeks in session very much closer to one another because we have an early session from 2022. So when we end session at the end of April, we expect that they will be back probably in September to begin committee weeks for the next session, which will begin in January. So it almost feels more like a one long session. And that's important from a policy perspective because many of the ideas that maybe don't make it all the way to the finish line this session, we will definitely see in 2022, particularly considering there's such a short period of time in between those. We don't know yet what the committee meetings are going to look like. If they are going to be virtual, if we're going to be able to attend and come in, in smaller groups to speak and to hear. They haven't given that guidance yet. They're trying to determine how it all can be done safely. And of course, that will impact if any of you come up to Tallahassee, the meetings that we are able to have, but we will certainly keep you posted on that as well. And then this is my contact information, and I can also share with you, I see my cell phone is not on here, but I can share that with you, and anytime you are free to contact myself, Jim. We are here to help and support the district in any way we can, and we certainly would like to do so. So please feel free.
Thank you, Jessica. I believe some of the board members probably have questions or comments now.
Anybody? Dr. Jones?
Just one question. How many districts do you work with in the state?
Sure. So we represent we represent 6 districts, and then you all, so 7. And then we also work with, as I think Mr. Bass said, I'm sorry, I thought I stopped sharing my screen. But we also represent the Heartland Education Consortium, which is a group of the smaller districts in and around Lake Okeechobee.
Thank you.
6.
Dr. Shipp?
I have a series of questions, so I can either ask them all at once, or I can ask a couple and then pass on and then come back. And we haven't sort of gotten to protocol section yet.
Well, you're on a roll. Why don't you? Go ahead.
I'm on a roll. Hi, Jessica, wherever you went. Oh, no.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to get back. I'm sorry.
We hear you, so, yeah.
Here we go.
Okay. Jessica, can you tell me exactly what is your role and relationship with school boards specifically?
That really depends from district to district. Each district handles it differently. In some cases, we work just directly with superintendent and staff. That's how they design it. In other cases, we work with the entire group. In some cases, we talk more with the superintendent or his or her designee on a more regular basis, and then we come in and share and meet with the school board from time to time. It really depends on each district.
Okay, because in noticing all of the services, it is. It's on. Are you not getting it, Chris? Yes? Okay. You had a list of services there that you provide, and I'm wondering to whom in the district those go? Because I know that I've been on the board for a couple of years. We've had conversations about our legislative platform. We've had 2 school board legislative liaisons since I've been on the board. And this is the first time we've gotten to hear a presentation from you. So I'm not aware of all of these, the weekly report and the budget reports and the summary reports that were all on that slide. Can you say a little bit more about how those work, who they go to? Because Personally, I haven't seen them, but I can't speak for my fellow board members.
Sure, sure. And I don't have my list in front of me. What we do typically is we reach out and the leadership from the district will tell us who to put on a list. And of course, you all have, we're in a new state with new leadership, but I'd be happy to get you that list. I just don't have it right in front of me. And that is then who we send all of those reports out to. And then, of course, as I said, when there are really specific, very quick turnaround kind of issues, we usually have a point person at the district that we call to talk about those issues when it's a real timely, something happening with the legislature that's time sensitive.
So to make sure I understand this, your relationship is with whoever is your point person in the administration of the district. And unless you're specifically told to do so, it's not considered part of your role or responsibility to reach out directly to the board or the board chair. Is that right?
That is not how we have operated with you all since I have come on board. When the relationship began with Indian River, that was actually before me. But that is the way it has always been handled since I have been a part of it.
So can you tell me a little bit, and if you don't.
I have a question, yeah.
Yeah, I'll ask one more, and then, I kind of have a list here, but can you give me some indication of how often you communicate with who is your point person in the district, by email, by phone? Can you give me a sense of how that communication is happening and how regularly that communication is happening?
Sure. It's certainly more frequent during the committee weeks in session. It is definitely once a week. Well, probably more than that because I send out a report once a week and then we have a conference call once a week. So that's a regular kind of communication. And then if there is anything that comes up, then we would certainly speak with them. And then, the folks also contact us if they have any questions, if staff has questions. We've worked primarily with your former CEO and now your current CEO, both of them we worked with when it came to budget time and giving them information about the budget development. If they ever have any questions about what we send, they reach out.
Our CEO or our CFO?
CFO.
Thank you. So you don't necessarily monitor school board meetings to see when or if at all we're talking about legislative issues?
Unless I'm asked to come, I don't, that's not been something we have done in the past, but we're happy to.
Okay. I'll stop for a minute and I'll turn it over.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, this is a first I've heard this past week that we actually had a contract with a lobbyist firm, because I'll be real honest with you, I did a lot of work last year on tracking bills and trying to be a lobbyist when I'm not a lobbyist because I was the board liaison. And full disclosure, I go to Tallahassee because my husband works up there. And he does work for a state representative, our representative here. So I do know a little bit about the process, but of course I'm not a lobbyist, so I did the best I could for our board. But I was a little dismayed when I found out that we've actually been paying for a service that we haven't been getting. So I did reach out and ask about that, and I was told some things. I don't know if my fellow board members were told, but Dr. Moore, could you enlighten us as to what happened there?
Absolutely, through the chair, and I'll be just as transparent could be. This is a contract that renews halfway through the year, so February is when it renews. It was a service I wasn't aware that we had in place, and quite honestly, amidst the pandemic, wasn't at the top of the list of transitioning in as superintendent. Information does come to me, other staff members, Mr. Fagan, regarding those communications, which kind of allows us to review that information, drive our work, and facilitate our particular conversations. There were, in problem solving, why the level or the quality of the relationship wasn't established in a way in which really drives our work and minimizes the impact of board members. It was told to me that there was a clear line in the sand in terms of interaction with board members under the previous administration. So upon hearing that, I thought it is a good opportunity to have the conversation on correcting that. More cleanup still needs to take place moving forward. So this is just one opportunity to review the current structure and then define a structure that does work effectively for us moving forward.
So how much have we paid per year then for a service that we really haven't been seeing? As a board member, I would have liked to have seen this. Believe me, it would have saved me a lot of hours last year.
Mr. Chair, I think the cost is $6,000 a year, but Mr. Fagan is double
Can I,
check.
6,900, I think.
Yeah, 69. So, plus change, correct?
Yeah.
But the question is.
It has not changed.
It has
Okay.
not.
So for that service, no, you're shaking your head no?
It has not changed.
No,
Oh.
I would say it hasn't changed.
Okay.
The amount.
So for that amount, then, we're not getting extra service like advocating. We're just getting the services that you mentioned, the daily emails, the newsies, the legislative reports, the budgetary reports, the summary reports, the copies of bills, watch and alert, weekly conference calls, year-round budget information, weekly communication during committee weeks. I've not seen any of that.
I haven't either.
And I don't know who it's going to in our district, but I would like to know.
Sure, I'd be happy to get that to you all. I don't have it right in front of me, but I do have a list where I send my email, and I'd be happy to share that.
Yeah, because I don't like spending money and not getting something
Sure.
for it. It's frustrating.
No,
Plus, I did that
I
work, so it would have been nice to
completely
have this.
understand. Oh, I'm sorry.
Especially monitoring committee weeks. I actually went during committee week and listened and sat in on education all day long. It is interesting to monitor it, but it's also a difference when you're going and advocating. And
Sure.
one little district is not as powerful as if you're working like with the Heartland Consortium and that sort of thing. So I guess our concern would be, what do you lobby for on behalf of the other districts that you represent? Would that include us, or would we have to pay for an extra one just to lobby for little old us, which I'm not quite sure how much that power would hold in Tallahassee.
Well, it would really depend on exactly what you all want. And, to be honest with you, in the last couple of years, there wasn't necessarily a cohesive desire from the board to have any advocacy in one particular direction. So I think that might be part of why we haven't done that work. That wasn't part of our contract because there wasn't maybe a desire from the district. There wasn't an agreement perhaps amongst everyone on what to advocate for. That being said, we could easily provide a kind of an array of services and break that down to show what we like to do in the education community as much as possible is work with any fellow districts that may have similar goals and try to build a coalition. Because as you said, obviously we have some districts in the state that are quite large. And they have the power of that. And so what we can do when you're a medium or smaller district is if you band together with like-minded districts, and there are almost always like-minded districts, we try to build a coalition. An example would be this was years ago, but I'm just thinking of something off the top of my head. There was a desire for districts that have federal lands that are not taxed. So you have your Air Force bases and the like, as well as any Native American reservations. They don't get taxes from that, but they do have students, and sometimes those students have particular needs. And so those districts banded together to lobby for additional funds on that basis from the legislature, and we worked on that. So that's just an example of something we could do.
Well, I actually have an example of something we've discussed as a board, and that is in order to, sometimes we have to go out for TAN, and we have to do that because of the way funding comes back. We're a district that gives more than gets more. So I know there are other districts out there that are in the same situation that we're in. What is it, how many? 13?
13 or 12, yeah.
13 or 12. And whether or not you represent any of those, I don't know, but that's something that I know we have a concern with, is trying to make budget. This year we're fine. Next year I'm not so sure. So that would be something that I would like that information before we decide if that's something we want to have an advocacy for.
Sure.
Okay. Go ahead, Rosario.
Thank you. Hi, Jessica. Can we call you Jessica? I'm Jacqueline
please.
Rosario. I have a couple of questions that are that are leaning more towards your services, your direct services. I also had no idea that we had this relationship or not with you all. But with that said, what is I went on your website, I read the documents, I read, the PowerPoint presentation. I'm unfamiliar to a great extent on the processes and other than what you've expressed and other than what generally I know in the lobbying world, I suppose. But what is your organization's, and I know what you're going to say, but I need to ask anyway. What is your organization's political leaning? And then how does that impact or not a board's legislative priorities in terms of your services for us?
Sure. So it's very important, in my view, for anyone who's going to be lobbying to not take a specific side. We're there to represent our client as opposed to maybe one political issue or another. So we work with the legislators that are there, and we make relationships with those folks that are there and then the new folks that come on. We don't take political positions based on any personal opinions. We work on what our clients tell us they would like us to advocate for. One of the ways we do that's very important to us, is, we work with school districts. We don't work with maybe other entities that we think would have conflicting interests with school districts. We're very careful about that. Even my colleagues who don't work in the education space in any kind of way, we always, before anyone takes on another client, we discuss it and ensure that there won't be a conflict, because in our view, it's very important that we operate at the highest level of integrity and not work and pit one client against another or anything like that. That's just not how we would ever operate.
Thank you. I have two more questions, one for you and then one for Dr. Moore. Jessica, how do you all, as in the work that you do, how do you measure your successes? How do you measure whether the lobbying is actually effective for each district's priorities? Like, how does that work? And then how is that, how are boards effectively supposed to do the same for you all?
Sure. And that is a challenge. In the education world, I think there's two ways. Sometimes it's defeating a measure that we didn't like. And then sometimes it's getting adjustments. Well, I should say three ways then. Adjusting a bill. So maybe there's a bill out there that the district just does not like in any kind of way. But we work to improve it. Maybe it's still not exactly what the district would have wanted, but it's better than what we started with. And so the impact will be less on the district. And then of course there's when we're actively trying to get some change, either a budgetary change, get something to help you out in that way. Maybe there's a particular policy that you would like to see changed. Then we obviously know when we work and advocate for that and are successful, we know that that's a win. But in our world, because sometimes we're not always playing offense, sometimes we're playing defense, we have to kind of look at those other factors as well, either defeating a bad issue or maybe making it slightly more palatable for implementation.
I think as I'm thinking this through in my head, I would, if this is where we are heading and the board moves forward with renewing your contract, I think something that I would like, Dr. Moore, is to invite them in at some point so that we could have something that you mentioned earlier, which was speaking to the boards on issues and the processes and expectations that we might have of you, and maybe identifying at that point who would be the point person at our district so we're all on the same page, how we're getting that information, with especially the board liaison. I definitely want the board liaison to be a part of that communication, but I certainly would be interested in that if we were to move forward with this. The last question that I had is for Dr. Moore, and maybe Mr. Fagan, I'm not sure. So when this contract renewed in February, right? Because I think it says every February, did I get that right?
June, isn't it?
June.
It's June.
Well, one is July, and I saw a February date, but okay, June, July, whenever it renewed. I don't remember seeing that. I don't remember this contract coming to us. My memory often fails me, but is this something that automatically renews?
Through the
Or
chair.
is this something that we have to approve, or did we just miss it?
Through the chair, no, ma'am. Since it is less than $50,000, it doesn't go to the board. The renewal dates are July to July, and in February is when it became assigned going from Nixon over to Rutledge. So that's the February date. It's actually when the
Okay, so
assignment.
that's what I saw?
The assignment date is February, but the terms of the contract are July to June.
Assignment date?
Yes, that's when it went from Nixon and Associates to Rutledge and Associates.
Okay.
That's when they assigned the
So
contract.
right
over.
now, we're just looking from June to June.
And it's an older styled contract where it has an automatic renewal, very similar to contracts. If we don't cancel and they don't cancel, then it automatically renews for another year unless you give 30 days notice.
Okay, so right now, we have a contract with them.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes,
So let's move forward then with certainly inviting them in, please, so that we can, and certainly for my personal growth, my professional growth, and ask more questions at that point, please.
All right, we started with Dr. Jones. Follow up, and then Dr. Schiff.
Thank you. Mr. Bass, I know you said that you used this when you were in Glades County as superintendent. Could you just tell us why you thought it was important and how it helped the district?
Yes, ma'am. We actually worked with Rutledge Yesenia, and Jessica, I don't know if you were tactfully saying that about the federal impact aid, but Glades was part of that, and working with Jessica and the staff there, we were able to secure a line item in the FEFP. Now, I believe there are 8 districts that get that funding because we were losing property tax money. So obviously, that was a huge success, not specifically with Yesenia Rutledge, but other lobby firms that we had used. We secured funding for special facility funding to build the schools, and then also digital classroom base allocation. We fought to get that because if you only base that on FTE, originally the way it was going to be done, you would not get a lot of money. And it saves schools money also the same way. So that is the benefits that I've worked with.
Dr. Schiff?
Thank you. I have questions, comments, and then discussion. Like Mrs. Berenborg, this is the first I've heard of it. I have some concerns about that. Because I too noted the amount of work that Mrs. Berenborg did last year that didn't happen in my first year on the board. So I was really grateful when she did it for the second year on the board, but I'm now surprised to hear that we actually had somebody who should have been doing that work for us, and through whatever crack it fell through, we were not aware of that, and I'm saying that as graciously as I can. That said, moving forward, I'm going to ask one really hard question. This is a Mr. Fagan question. I'm going to make a comment, and then I'm going to toss it out to the board. Because my question is, if for any reason we chose to not go forward with this contract, are there consequences if we, and I'm not saying we're doing this, this is not my decision, I am one board member, and I'm just getting information. If we were to choose to terminate this contract, what are the consequences for that? If we choose to terminate it in June and move forward, and shift, I assume we can just do that. What I want to know is what our options are. I know that Mr. Bass has worked in the past with, I'm going to get the name wrong, but the Florida Coalition of Small School Districts.
Through the chair, you're very close. Small School District Coalition.
Okay, oh, I had all the right words, just in the wrong order. I am interested in knowing the work that they do. I'm interested in knowing how they do the work they do. I'm interested in knowing the cost to participate in that group and how it's similar or different from this service. So I'm actually asking Dr. Moore to get that information and bring that to us at a future board meeting.
No problem.
Because I want to understand what our options are. And one of the reasons I want to understand that is because, well, I certainly have nothing personal against you, Jessica. I don't know where the camera is. If I look this way, I think you see the back of my head. This is not a personal conversation. This is about how we best move forward for the district. And in so doing, I am concerned that there was a history, as what I'm hearing is that there was a history of the then superintendent asking this organization to not communicate with the board. I don't know how that happened. I don't know what the details were. I wasn't here. But I don't love that that's the history of our relationship. And I don't love what that brings forward into a future relationship. I don't know the impacts of that, but I want to have an honest conversation with my fellow board members about what they would like to see moving forward, about continuing in, and this is not necessarily your fault, Jessica, I'm not laying blame here, but it's a tainted relationship in some ways. Because having been here for a couple of years, having done the work that we've done, having had many conversations about legislative platforms prior to this one, and now we're just learning that we actually, there was the possibility of somebody actually helping us in this work who we pay to help us do this work. So I'm concerned about what that looks like moving forward, both substantively in terms of the work itself, financially in terms of the cost, and sort of, I don't know what the word would be, but in terms of, relationally, moving forward in a relationship that I think was misdirected in the past and doesn't necessarily bear well for creating what it is that we as this board want to achieve moving forward. And in getting the information we want, I'd like to, as Mrs. Rosario asked, have some measure by which to evaluate the costs and benefits and the successes of the services that we either get from this organization or from another organization so that we can compare apples to apples and make a more informed decision moving forward.
Mrs. Berenberg?
Thank you.
Barefoot.
I believe I was next.
I know. Would it be okay if I just comment on this real quick, on what she said, so we don't get to?
I'm gonna.
Mr. Barrow?
I'm going to. Okay. So I agree with you, Dr. Schiff. And I agree with what you said about looking for options, because one thing I was going to bring up is there are consortiums out there that if you join the consortium, they do have a lobbyist firm that works with them and provides similar information, if not the same. So why would we pay 69 plus change a year for the services that we could get by also joining a consortium and getting other services and maybe even less expensive? So I'm not sure. I agree. I think we need to look at this as a whole and, have a little dialogue back and forth about it. But I also want to ask one more question, and that is, I'm going to piggyback on what Mrs. Rosario said, is having you come down here, what would the added cost be? Maybe to help repair, which isn't your fault, like she said, but maybe repair kind of what's happened. It's our fault on our end. We need to find out what happened on our end. But I think because this is a surprise to those of us that have been sitting here for 2 years wondering what the heck happened, we would like to know, what are the options? What can you help us with in repairing this situation that we have? And also, if you were to come down, my suggestion would be, and I don't know if you want to be away from Tallahassee then, but I think towards the ends of committee weeks, because that's when things are really moving to the floor. And then you can give us very clear understanding on what's moving to the floor and what we might want to have advocacy on. Because sometimes you see a bill that comes up in the beginning, which from looking, I read all those bills last year and it was crazy to follow. But I will say there are some crazy bills out there. And you think, oh gosh, what if that got to the floor? But then of course it doesn't get to the floor, thank goodness. So we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to advocate for it. So I don't think we should spend money advocating for something that really isn't going to have a possibility of getting to the floor. So that's the one point I would say is if we do have you come down, I think it would be best to come down more towards the end of committee weeks.
Sure. In fact, there's usually, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my dates right now. There's usually a week, and it looks like we have it this year, between committee weeks in session. They usually take a week and let members go home. So they can be with their families one last time before 60 days of being up in Tallahassee. And that may be a great time because then we will have gotten all through the committee weeks. And as you said, we'll have a much better sense about what is moving, what's not moving, where we think we're going to be from a budgetary perspective, all those things.
Mrs. Zara?
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Berenborg, for sharing that. Because I think you and I are on the same page with that, and that's what I wanted to mention as a follow-up to what Dr. Schiff mentioned. One of the questions was, how would it affect us if we do not move forward with renewing this contract? And I think, just looking at the past 2 years, we haven't been using your services at all. And as a result, we've had one of our board members do, as Dr. Schiff mentioned, Mrs. Berenborg, last year, and even prior when Mrs. Zork was the liaison, although I can't attest to Mrs. Zork doing as much as Mrs. Berenborg did, still, we haven't used your services in 2 years. We've been paying you for services that, have kind of fallen to the wayside. And so I think that's one of the, one of the consequences of not having a lobbyist organization fight for our priorities would be not having someone there speaking on our behalf. But that said, of course, when you come in, we'll talk about that.
Sure.
What Mrs. Berenborg just mentioned, something else that I also wanted to ask a question on is, if we were to wait, and this is a timeline that I'm unfamiliar with, if we were to wait to have you come in, what does that do to our current priorities? What does that do with the priorities that we have drafted, that we are drafting? Are those still going to be sent to you? Dr. Moore, how does this work? I don't know. Do we still share them since we are utilizing them until June? They are our lobbyists essentially. Do we hold off? Do we not hold off? Like what happens?
Through the chair, in our research as to why this is so difficult, in my year of reflection, or finishing a first year, and be very, very honest, the work that Ms. Berenborg did was, I know she got job offers anyway, so I guess I can say that.
I did, actually.
Was absolutely outstanding. But as I look back and compare my own professional history, not something I was familiar with at all. So in doing the research and tasking Mr. Fagan to begin looking, we found this organization that, I was not aware that we were working with, receiving the information, receiving the content. Yes, receive a lot of content. But it is creating a relationship based on the services that we would like to have. What we were receiving was, from a historical perspective, information that was being pulled together and shared via email. Any phone conversations, I don't know if anyone on staff was participating, but I can tell you I wasn't. Now that I know that it is in place, there are services that we could tailor to meet our specific needs, which would require a shifting or modifying of the particular contract. My recommendation is to, in listening to the direction I think the board is going, is to circle back and create what a scope of work would be for us that meets our specific needs, which would require assistance in the crafting of what our priorities would be as a board. And leaning on that information, I can create, as I have throughout this entire year, internal structures to disseminate the information streamlined to our specific needs and share that information with the board as it becomes available. And I think that would be the opportunity to kind of step back from the work, work with the organization, and define what would be our needs to share the information as it's flowing through Tallahassee to keep you informed, while at the same time, an additional conversation, what would be a shift or a modification in the creation of what our board priorities would, our legislative priorities would be. And that would be an opportunity for us to kind of test drive the car that's been in the garage for a very, very long time that we just found the keys to. And in using it, then we'll make a determination that this is the organization in which we want to go with, or maybe it's another organization. I don't know, but I'm willing to take it out for a test drive and create something that specifically meets our needs, while at the same time improves the flow of communication through Tallahassee.
So let me just wrap this up, because we spent a lot of time rehashing what could have or should have been, but hasn't been. So let's look to the future. I think, and maybe the suggestion, Ms. Berenberg, you've worked on this before, perhaps you could be our representative in discussions with Dr. Moore and staff in terms of crafting. What is it, whoever provides it can be most valuable? And it seems to me I have some experience with, in another industry when I have my investment banking hat on. I get every week, particularly when the legislature's in session, as do all of this lobbying firm's clients on the topic that we hire them for, exactly what's going on the topic. And when the legislature's out of session, only on an as-needed basis. And obviously, you always have the ability to pick up the phone and call. And it seems to me that a summary email at the end of each week to all of us, at the very least, is very easy to do. I don't know whether you do that for other clients, but that's what I'm used to in another world, another area that the legislature's involved in. So it seems to me if between Mrs. Berenberg and Dr. Moore can bring back and suggest what would be valuable to you as a district and keep us informed is the way to go. I'm less concerned about what it costs. I'm more concerned about the value of the information. And you tend to pay for what's valuable, and what's free isn't worth much. So if we can move forward on that basis, I'm good with that. How do my colleagues? Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, to clarify a couple things. The other organizations that we've referenced aren't free. So it's not like by joining the coalition of smalls, whatever that coalition is.
No, you'd have to
there's
pay.
a cost to that too.
Sure.
There's two different things here. One is the information providing service, and the other is the lobbying service. So what I'm hearing is provided here, or as part of this contract, is providing information. It's not actually lobbying. If we were to request lobbying, that's an additional cost and additional service. Whether or not that service is provided by joining another organization, we don't yet know. And what we've heard in this conversation is that there's some benefit to coordinating with other small school districts, of which we are one of the larger of what would be considered a small school district. So going as a group is often more powerful than as an individual. And those are the distinctions that I'm interested in learning as we decide what's most productive moving forward.
This is a classic needs analysis.
Yeah.
It goes on in every business that I've been associated with for too many years. This is not rocket science. So if you all find what it is we need that would be value added to you as the administration and to the board, and obviously, if there's a particular issue that needs to be advocated for and we need to pay for it, then we'll make a decision accordingly. But I think let's collect the information you need, whether it's Jessica's firm or another firm. Sometimes it's two firms. Find out what, Mr. Bass, your organization that you're familiar with. We can compare notes and see, and there may be an opportunity here to have some tailored advocacy from Jessica's firm and more broad-based advocacy from the coalition that you referenced and that Ms. Berenberg seems to be familiar with.
I agree.
I agree.
All right? Okay. Jessica, thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in person. You probably look forward to seeing some people in person as well.
Very much so.
All right.
Yes, thank you all for taking the time, and I certainly am excited to have increased communication and to be able to dialogue with you all, and I look forward to doing that very soon.
And by the way, if you have any updated information while we're going through this assessment, you can get our emails from Dr. Moore's office or Mr. Bass, and feel free to provide us with updates that you think, being in the education business, that you think would be valuable to us while we go through, the next few weeks.
That would be wonderful. I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica.
All right. Moving on. The next agenda is school board protocols, which I'm sure since the last meeting, many of you have just been dying to get into. I think the goal from my perspective is, and it was interesting, I listened to meeting management on the FSBA virtual thing, I guess it was last week, and I also listened to Robert's Rules of Order, and frankly, I got so confused how you amend an amendment after there was an amendment, amending a motion, that I had to go back and listen to it again last night. I mean, that's 75 minutes of Robert's Rules of Orders. Is there an executive summary of such things available? That's the question.
There's a cheat sheet.
I know.
Do you have it?
Nancy has provided, at least with me, with the cheat sheet. But I did think it was quite valuable. And obviously, in dealing with the public sector, which is what this is, versus at least my experience in trying to run a board or manage a board or a committee meeting in the private sector, very different. And so I'm anxious to have this conversation. The goal here is to have our meetings be most efficient, most productive, as little redundancy as possible. And so, Dr. Moore, I'm going to hand it off to you, and you can lead, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of input from all of us.
Absolutely, and I am here to collect information. So what I did to help facilitate this conversation is put together some documentation that I found, boardmanship policies from other districts. As you have reviewed them by now, I'm sure they're very similar in nature. I also provided 2 policies that we have within our school system, not necessarily a great deal of information. I did think it was a good starting point to facilitate the conversation. As the chair just mentioned at the conference last week, there was a parliamentary procedures workshop and debriefing or prepping each of you for this conversation. A number of you had mentioned that workshop. Ms. Rosario was kind enough to send me the PowerPoint, and I can see why you were so confused because it's a very hefty PowerPoint. But I did take the liberty to share with each of you so you have it at your table. If it helps facilitate the conversation, that would be a good idea. In prepping, I also mentioned to each of you that my commitment is to continue this as an agenda item until we have the opportunity really to get this right. And I will say publicly, this is a very important conversation. We are creating the conditions and the behaviors that boards will continue to follow way beyond any of us. And that is just the truth. Only if we take the time to get it right. So as you begin to have the conversation or give input, I did have the next agenda item on the agenda listed as the school board FSABA training. In meeting with them this morning, just collecting information, we have an additional workshop available to us as we began master board training at the beginning of my tenure. Obviously, because of COVID and a number of other reasons, we did not finish that particular series of professional developments to become a master board. We have the one additional training left over. They are agreeing to take that one training and give us credit towards master board training. So I would have to, under your direction, work back with them to take the other 2 courses, which they promised me would not be the same exact content for the board members that were involved in the previous one. So in order to become a master board, which is a conversation for you all to have, we have one workshop in the bank, kind of, sort of, that we would be able to define where we think that information could be. Their recommendation would maybe be to continue on a boardsmanship conversation or a protocol conversation, and they would facilitate that conversation with us in the creation of those protocols or boardmanship agreements. And then we would create the other 2 days' agenda in collaboration with them at that first training. So I say that to give a level of encouragement that as you go through this conversation or dialogue today, not to think that you're going to get to an ending point or have to get to an ending point. But I would be very interested, based on the information that I shared, as well as the information that you have gleaned from the workshop by FSBA last week, the direction that you would like to go in the creation of a boardmanship or procedures in order to meet the intent that you kick this item off with, being very efficient, honoring everyone's time, and being good steward of the community in terms of the education and funding that we have available to us to do that work.
So maybe the way to proceed here is if each of us got a few minutes, and I mean a few, to sort of outline what you think the number one goal or issue that we should put on the table, and see how many others might agree with that. For example, with me, I'll just throw it out. It's how long school board members, each of us, should speak to a topic before allowing other members to speak to the same topic, but then then we can circle back and you can have follow-up. I think one of the things that happens, and this is someone sitting at home watching some of these school board meetings over the last 6 months, and I say I don't want to live in history because this is a whole new board, but I have to say that some of the conversation just went on and on and on, and I don't think it was particularly effective, number one. And number two, I think it's unfair to the other board members who may have something to say and yet don't get a chance. So my number one thing, and after that I'm quite flexible, is that we figure out, much like we limit citizen input to 3 minutes, that we limit, at least initially, on topics, some period of time. It can be 3 minutes, it can be 5 minutes, it can be whatever it is, so that everybody has a chance to voice their opinion if they so choose, and then we can circle back.
May I?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being courageous in saying that, because I know it is a courageous topic to talk about when we're limiting ourselves. I will say this isn't uncommon. This is very common to do on boards. As a matter of fact, the State House does it. So when you go and you listen in the State House meetings, there will be a member that will be speaking, and you'll hear a timer, and they get, I think it's 5 minutes to a topic. And then what happens is they have to stop. They're told exactly, stop. Another member will speak, another member will speak. And then somebody will say, point of order or whatever. And if there's a motion on the table and a second to continue the conversation after everyone's gotten an opportunity to speak, then a vote's taken whether or not to continue the conversation or to go ahead and vote. And what it does is it allows for everybody to get their opinion heard, and also to decide whether or not you're going to sway somebody's opinion for the vote. Because essentially that's what you're doing, is you're listening to your fellow board members and you're trying to decide whether or not that what they're saying is going to maybe help you choose how you're going to vote. So, or you can say, well, you know, I've told them all how I feel, but they still won't vote for it. Well, then why continue? Because really we each have one vote, and you're looking at the numbers and saying, do I have the vote or not? So I think that allows, you know, if I want to hear a board member says they're not done, and I want to make a motion to, let's go ahead and extend the conversation, and there's a second, and then we all vote and say, yes, do it, then that allows people to continue. Because there are some topics that will need more conversation than 5 minutes each. But I do agree with you. I think our meetings have been long. Whether or not they've been as productive as they could be, I'm not sure. I think you can, you know, just like we limit people that are speaking at the dais, you can get your point across pretty quickly. I don't think we should limit ourselves to 3 minutes. I think 5 minutes is a good number. But I think that you can get your point across very carefully. And we all prepare for these meetings, so it's not like, you know, Sometimes you think of something last second, that's true, and sometimes I like to speak later because I will think while you're speaking, I'll think of things. But I'm used to a protocol. And when I was in meetings as an administrator, I had a pad of paper in front of me, and there was actually a protocol form that we used, and we weren't allowed to interrupt anybody. And so even if you want to, because you really want to say something, like, you know, I want to follow that person because I want to say something about that person, we wrote it down. And then we would come back to it and say, you know, even though that was 10 minutes ago, I would say, you know, Mrs. Schiff brought up this point, I want to be able to say something to that point. So that's why they give us paper and pencil, so we can write those things down and be able to come back to them. And that's just a simple meeting protocol that's used a lot, not just thinking here for the first time.
Yeah,
Dr. Schiff.
Thank you. I don't disagree with limiting the amount of time that individual board members speak to a topic. I have two concerns. One is that sometimes in speaking to a topic, we're not just getting our point across, but we're asking questions. So if we have a question of the superintendent or the deputy superintendent and need to know an answer, if that's included in our 5 minutes, that changes the nature of the conversation. So I'd like to have some clarity around that.
That's fair.
Secondly, to the idea of voting on a topic, I think I'd need to understand that a little bit better. I appreciate, but I'm reflecting actually back on our last meeting, where I was quite adamant about a particular thing about our meetings. And it took some work to get other board members.
Really?
Yeah, no kidding, right, exactly. You know, it doesn't happen often, but it happens. Well, that may not be true.
Self-awareness, that's the first
Right.
key.
But it took more than 5 minutes for me to engage and convince my fellow board members of something about which I felt very strongly. So I do have some concern about shutting down conversations that may be important, but haven't been heard or spoken in quite the right way to reach other ears in a way that is meaningful to them. So I'd like to consider that very carefully before we make a decision on, because what the other thing is, if we're voting on a topic, that also leads to sort of alliance building and coalition building, and we're going to shut this board member down or that board member down, and I don't want to fall into that trap.
Yes, ma'am, your turn.
Thank you so much. I am not in support of limiting board members from, to a particular, 5 minutes or 3 minutes or anything. Before we move forward, though, I would like us to consider the fact that we have a new board chair. Under the previous board chair, there were times when, for example, if someone called a question or called a motion, it was not adhered to appropriately, leading into some lengthy discussions. That may not be the issue right now, right? We have a different board chair. So if someone were to call the question or call the issue, discussion is ended, hopefully. And that would limit. We are responsible for how our meetings are run. If we were to follow Robert's rules accurately, I think that we would be able to shut down conversations without shutting down conversations rudely, but shut down conversations that are just going on and on and on. So I don't want to limit a board member to 3 minutes or 5 minutes. I don't want to limit any board member, but I want us to be able to follow the parliamentary procedures appropriately so that our meetings are more effective. That said, I'd also like to remind you all that this is our only time that we meet. We don't meet every single day. We do not talk to each other except for at these meetings. So how can we limit what we're saying to each other with 3 to 5 minutes and then effectively say that we're building relationship or that we're building consensus rightly or that we're building, that we're working to our full potential when we're constantly trying to look at the clock. Now, I understand that we have staff members that need to be here as well, and I want to be respectful to the staff who help us to get our work done. But I also don't want to limit the work that we have to do when we meet, twice a month, or however many times that is. So
So-
that's something that's a concern for me.
I get it, but here's the other side of that. If you're the first person to speak, or I'm the first person to speak, and I talk for 15, 20 minutes, I can only imagine how frustrated you, or Dr. Schiff, or Dr. Barenberg,
Mrs.
Doctor, you've been promoted.
I don't have, yeah, thank you.
You've been promoted.
I didn't do the work, though.
Right.
I
See,
started the work.
I think the limit, this is me, should be on the front end. 5 minutes, whatever the time is, make your point. Let everybody else make their point. Then, if you feel that you, or I feel that I, or whoever it is, really needs more time to expand it on, after listening to everybody's point of view on that topic, to me, that's the way you build relationships, because you show respect for everybody else's time. If you dominate, if I'm the first person and I dominate the conversation, I guarantee you, you're going to turn off your fellow board members, because you're just sitting there waiting for an opportunity either to agree, disagree, or express your own point of view. So that would be how I would respond to the idea that it's not a question of limiting. It's a question of being respectful of your fellow board members' time. Let everybody speak, and then you can follow up. So I don't know. Dr. Jones, you've been very quiet down there.
I probably led hundreds of meetings in my life, and I think we owe it to our community to be an efficient board with a student focus at all times. I really want to thank Dr. Moore. I really want to get into the master board training. I think it's going to be wonderful. I want this district to soar. And the code of boardmanship, I think we could look at a couple that are in here and really develop our own. I came out of retirement for this district and community because I believe in it so very much. And I think as long as we're respecting one another, showing courtesy, and being professional, we're going to be just fine. When you take a look at the roles and responsibilities of school board member, and I had to really focus in on this because I've had different responsibilities, there are several, but the main ones are policy, budget, and hiring and evaluating the superintendent. So even though many discussions will happen, I believe what our chairperson said regarding to start out with so much time and then see if we have to add anything, I think it's important. I've watched board meetings in this district for 30 years. I have seen very efficient boards that can do one meeting a month and one workshop a month. I've seen boards where there are 2 meetings and the efficiency isn't there. I understand it from a staff point of view, lots of work going into this. We get all the results of the work. Yes, we have to study it and we have to discuss it and have some good interaction. But I just think back to what we owe this community, and how we do it is going to be effective for our student focus. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and I think the code of boardsmanship that you gave us from Seminole County is a good starting point for us. I think I agree with the fact that Ms. Rosario is bringing up Robert's Rules, and she's right. Robert's Rules can police board members. It can police the board. I think the way it's done, if you don't take it personally when somebody says point of order, sometimes you can take it personally because you're in the middle of a sentence and you're talking and you're excited about something or you want to drive your point home and somebody says that. And it does throw you off balance. But if we all understand and respect each other that somebody's going to do that because they're going to say, okay, you've made your point, we get it, we understand what you're saying, but I think it's time for us to vote. And if we don't take it personally when that happens, I think we can police ourselves. But I agree with you on the first time that we speak, perhaps giving ourselves a 5 minutes. So that way, you're right. Sometimes I do get frustrated. I'll be real honest. I get frustrated because I'm sitting there going, I'm writing as much as I can down here. And then somebody brings up something and I cross it out. Because I say, okay, I don't have to bring that up now because somebody else brought it up. But sometimes we don't do that as board members. We want to say, okay, I said it too, or I said it also. let's be respectful of the fact that if another board member brings something up, we don't have to bring it up. You know, we can cross it off and just say, okay, somebody else already covered that, we're good to go. We're working as a team and try not to outshine each other, I think is the important part. So if we can maybe start with 5 minutes each and go down the line, whoever's talking, you know, and then 5 minutes for each of us the first time we speak. And then, as the chair, you say, is there anybody else that would like to do a follow-up? And that's when we have an unlimited, and then when we can just say point of order, or we can say, I have, you know, call the questioner, or whatever you want to do, then we can, I think, move more efficiently.
Yeah, I think the point of order, and Terry, you're a lot more familiar with Robert's rules than I am. I tried to listen. The problem with point of order is if you're talking about, you're discussing something, and you haven't necessarily a motion to vote, point of order doesn't serve the purpose.
Right.
It serves the purpose if there's a motion on the floor with a second that's going to require a vote.
I think
But-
we're confusing point of order and calling the vote, though.
Right.
They're two different
Call-
things. Point of
right.
order is to get back to Robert's rules. Calling the vote is to stop conversation and
Right.
take a vote. So those are different.
Yeah, but I'm saying is that all of these interpretations, I'll call them, go away if we're comfortable, even a little uncomfortable, limiting ourselves initially on a
Barefoot,
topic.
I'm sorry, you're being asked to talk into the mic.
All right. I think if we're respectful of each person's time and willing and ability to offer a point of view on a topic to 5 minutes, and then everybody speaks, they can say what they need to say, they can agree or disagree with somebody else, and then you have the opportunity to open it up and others want to continue, I think that solves the problem. And those who have a strong point of view, and I think Terry, your point is you hear things and then somebody else covers it. Well, you can say, well, I agree with Dr. Schiff on that particular point, so you don't have to say it again. And the repetition that sometimes happens gets taken out of it. And, you know, you reduce the time frame, you get to the point sooner. Dr. Schiff.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think 5 minutes is an initial, out of the gate, makes sense, and with follow-up conversation, so I've got no issue with that. I think we have to also be honest and understand that in the past, historically on boards, but there's a political element to this, right? And there's a playing to a constituency, and people want to be the first to say something, or they want to acknowledge who they're speaking to. And that gets sometimes in the way of our ability to work together as a team, because that individualizes us. Because what's being said is not always to the point of what's being said here for the benefit of fellow board members, it's being said for the benefit of others watching. The more we are able to work as a team, the better we can minimize the opportunity for that and have more of a united front when we need to, and disagreement when we need to, but for the purpose of doing the work, not for the purpose of political grandstanding. And I kind of want to lay that out, because I think it's been one of our fatal flaws in the past. So let's be conscious about how we do that, because I appreciate your comments about we build relationships sometimes by speaking less rather than more. I think that's a really good point. So I'm in favor and would ask if, to further the conversation, can we agree 5 minutes for an initial go-round? People can then follow up with open discussion until such point as it's no longer productive, and then we'll make a decision and move on.
I'm fine with that.
Yes, ma'am.
Our question, just for clarity, are you all suggesting that the subsequent comments that come after the initial 5 minutes are also timed?
No.
No?
And in the initial 5 minutes, we might have a question for Dr. Moore or Mr. Fagan.
Yeah.
We can ask the question, they can write it down. They don't have to respond at that moment, taking up
Right.
time in that particular part of the discussion. But after we go through our initial, what will be 25 minutes, there are 5 of us, they can then respond collectively to each board member's questions.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And Suzanne's up there watching this via Zoom. I don't know that we necessarily have to use the clicker Actually, when I heard the clicker the first time, I thought it was a fire drill. Yeah.
It's an awful sound.
But, you know, we can work that out, but I think for conversation's sake, I think that, you know, this discussion alone, it's like agreeing to meet twice a month until we only have to meet once a month, till we become comfortable with the idea we really don't have to be here twice a month.
If we become comfortable that there is.
When we become comfortable, we don't really have to be here unless there's something really important. And of course, in this COVID environment, with so many moving parts, so many different points of view, I mean, we all get these emails, some of them are very well written. I mean, you know, this is a challenging time.
Welcome.
Yeah, I got to tell you, it's emotionally difficult for people. And whether I or you are one of those people or not's beside the point. There's a lot of people that we have as our constituents here. You've got 18,000 students times 2 parents, or mostly 2 parents, and faculty, I call them faculty, staff, and teachers. So, but if we just agree on this, I think we've made a lot of progress. As far as and you referenced the seminal one. Now, I just wonder how, Dr. Moore, how you might suggest we end up creating our own 15, 10, 12, whatever the number of points are, one of which can be this.
We have it already. That's what we're supposed to
Yeah.
go over.
Well, these ones they're a little bit different. The
That's
seminal
right, yeah.
ones in our board policy is a little bit different.
They are.
Yeah.
That's what we're supposed to go over.
My intent was to review them. In facilitating conversations like this in the past, it could be kind of in the weeds. This may be, as you conduct this dialogue, an opportunity to have FSBA come in and facilitate the creation of this boardsmanship document, or what protocols that we would create. And that might be the most effective way to really end with a document that guides our behaviors, our interactions, our conversations, and ultimately the decisions that we make. I think this conversation will help FSBA guide or create that opportunity to pull us together and say, you know, in listening to the conversation that you had, I think the boardsmanship policies need to include, you know, respecting everyone's, you know, equal voice throughout the conversation. What does that look like? And my goal for that conversation really would be not only to create a boardmanship policy, because those are all just expectations. It's like our guiding principles that we have for our strategic plan. Behind them becomes the protocols that we are going to follow to ensure that we're upholding them. And that is the bigger part of the conversation. I think going through the contents of the boardsmanship, step number 1, and then creating the agreed upon rules of engagement throughout a board meeting on how we facilitate and honor that time, and what we're going to do when you get to 5 minutes. I mean, what's the, you know, how are we going to call time without someone becoming frustrated? Those are the kinds of things that we can do with FSBA to create those documents, not only the documents, but also the process as well.
May I make a comment on that? Yeah, I have seen that done in other places like the House floor, which is interesting to watch. They're actually given a warning. You know, House member, whatever, you have 1 minute to finish your response. So that way you can wrap up and you don't feel like you're cut off mid-sentence. I did participate, I know Dr. Schiff did, we didn't get in the same window. They were really good about doing that. But I do know you participated because other people I spoke to said, oh, I just spoke to another member of your school board and told me it was Dr. Schiff. So they had this interesting, it felt like speed dating, but it was speed meetings. That's what we wound up calling them. And basically, you had 3 minutes with a different board member from a different district. And it was one-on-one. It was 5:30 at night, and this was during the conference last week. And they popped up, and you had whatever conversation you were going to have, and then my timer didn't work. So I'd be mid-sentence and somebody would just disappear. So I started realizing, okay, my timer doesn't work. So I started telling people, please tell me when we have 30 seconds left. That way I get an idea that you're going to wrap up your conversation or I'm going to wrap up mine. So I think giving a, and the board attorney can do that for us. That's why I asked you about having the board attorney help us with protocols, because seriously, protocols are something that, we need to make sure that our board attorney is involved with because of Sunshine and Robert's rules and making sure that we document correctly. So I think that having her as the parliamentarian very quietly say you have 1 minute as a warning, we can hear that and still continue our conversation and not feel like we're being rudely interrupted.
To clarify, the chair is the parliamentarian, but we tend to use our attorney as the timekeeper. So in this
The
year-
chair is not the parliamentarian.
The lawyer is.
Suzanne? Can you
Suzanne is,
clarify?
yeah.
Yes, did I turn off my mute button
Yes,
appropriately?
you're fine.
According to your current policies, you have designated the school board attorney to be your parliamentarian, but that doesn't mean that the attorney runs the meeting, simply provides responses to questions of Robert's Rules of Order. The chairman continues to run the meeting.
Thank you.
And on that note, and I've discussed this with Dr. Moore and Nancy, that in the future, for my benefit, if nobody else's, I'd love to have you here rather than back there. Because I think that, you're part of the quote-unquote management team, and I think that if we can see you and you can give a sign, you don't necessarily have to press a buzzer. During public comment, you can perhaps be back there, because that's a better perch, so to speak. But that was a suggestion that I've made, and I think that, I don't know whether that's been discussed with you, but it would certainly be helpful, I speak for myself, to me.
Usually Suzanne's over there if there's space. She's only back there if there's not space because we have staff over there. So normally, when we were up here, she was on the dais. Since we moved down here, she's usually there unless a staff person needs that space, and then she's up here. So usually she is visible except during that part of the business meeting.
Well, the bottom line is we've worked that out so that when you're back amongst us, hopefully soon, you can be down in the front with a front row seat here.
Yes, sir, I'm happy to help.
Dr. Moore, what would you like to take this conversation from here?
Thank you, sir.
Well, can I have a comment about that? Because to you, sir. You mentioned that we have, the master board training is, it's 3 parts, and we did 2 with the previous board, which there's kind of no way around that, right? Because the board changes every 2 years, may or may not change every 2 years. We have 1 part left. I do agree that roles and responsibilities and protocol are certainly important, and I totally agree with your comment that if we do this well and right, it charts the culture of the board far beyond this board, which has, I think, been desperately needed. Two parts of that. One, though, I want, we have limited time left with FSBA on master board, and there are a number of things that we could be working on together. So I want to sort of make sure we all agree that of the few hours, however long that is, we have left with them, how we chart that time specifically, rather than just make an assumption this is the way to do it. And then secondly, are they going to have you had a conversation, are they going to do that in person or remotely?
Through the chair, 2 conversations today in preparation for this meeting. So to answer your question, we do have the 1 training that is available, which is a full day of professional development.
Full day, oh, okay.
With us. As you may recall, that was kind of a driver's choice. You're going to create, the board was going to say, with all the areas that they offer, we want to focus in this one specific area because that's our opportunity for growth. That is the workshop that we didn't have. Their recommendation is listen to this conversation, and if it's protocols or boardsmanship or Robert's Rules of Order, they can come in and provide that specific professional development. Now, their rule is when you have 2 or more board members, in order to be a master board, you kind of go through that training again. What they're offering us is a deal to honor the one that we have left, and then I would work with them to create pricing for the remaining 2. So in theory, this board would have the 3, but we can kind of piggyback on the one in which we still have remaining, which is not something they typically do. So I graciously thank them for that opportunity. And at the end of the first professional development, and those of you who have participated know, they kind of sit with us and define where the next 2 days would go, which would kind of go through some of this relationship building, charting our path. We did some very, very good ideas, some of which I did with my team. But they will create those and ensure that those who have participated wouldn't be sitting through the exact same professional development. Of course, it would be different with different individuals, but they would tailor it. They have a new series of development that they're now rolling out. So we would, have the opportunity to participate in something that's new for all of us, and at the end of the series, be Master Board certified.
And will they do that in person or remotely?
In person.
Thank you.
Are these 3 full days?
Yes.
So, and we have one, is this topic of protocols, does that really require, and I'm asking, a full day?
No, that's why I thought it was a half day. So when I hear that it's a full day, then
There
we
are
have
other-
opportunity for
I'm
this
not- I'm
plus
not-
something else.
Yeah, I'd rather spend a
That's a
half a
half day.
day and
That's-
find something else that's
Totally
really
agree.
helpful. Because that's a lot of time to spend
Yeah,
on
no, we don't
something
need
that ought to
a full-
be,
Please not with
I
this board,
won't say
I
it's
hope.
routine, but it's close to it.
May I make a suggestion? I think they're very helpful. You pick up the phone, you ask, Andrea's always accessible and everything. But I think one thing we've been talking about is this legislative priority thing and how to go about, there's other things that other boards are doing out there that we may not know to do. And I'm wondering if they have that sort of training, that here are the options that boards can consider doing, joining consortium, or what's the positive and negative, and, things like that. Because as you sit here and you think, okay, what is best for us to learn, and what is best to spend our money on? And I think it would be what helps us as a board get better as a board, and you can learn from others. And, we're not the be-all, end-all here. We need to learn what's best practices other places. So I think they've been there with 67 different counties, or 66 different counties, and they probably can tell us what's best practices out there. And I think that's the thing that we should seek.
All right, and just to Mr. Barefoot's point, it's not a full day of just one particular topic.
Yeah.
They do a very good job of breaking it up or chunking it out over the course of day. So it would be a coming together activity, and they don't do something that we kind of haven't collectively agreed upon. So what the process would be, I'd work with them, we'd create an agenda, I'd send it out for your review. Do you think this hits the mark? Based on your feedback, we would tweak it, and then once it's finalized, we define the date, and then we push out that agenda.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. When FSBA came, when the previous board agreed that FSBA would come and do this training with us, we all agreed that there would be 3 full-day trainings. Nancy's shaking her head yes. And this third full-day training would be tailored to whatever the board wants. The first 2 days were kind of team-building exercises and a lot of creating trust and creating communication, building, understanding what your goals are and where you want to go as a district. Revisiting your vision, I believe, was one thing that we talked about, and then there were some activities that we did along the way that were really kind of fun. But then the third day would have been this day coming up. And yes, it is a full day. We've already paid for it. It is waiting for us to, and then of course COVID came along. It is kind of waiting for us to pick and choose. They have a lot of different topics for us to choose from, so I'm looking forward to it. Whatever it takes, we have been elected to be the voice of our constituents, and part of Being a good board is being able to receive the information that is out there in our learning and our professional growth as well, and obviously from an organization that we have membership with. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to hearing what the other options are. I believe, if I remember correctly, that in a full day, there were maybe 2 or 3 options that we could choose from. This was definitely one that we did talk about within the first 2 days that we wanted to do. And we just didn't put it on the agenda. So this is long overdue by now to really ask them to help us with creating the boardsmanship policy and tailoring it to this new board.
Just real quick to follow up on Mrs. Berenborg's point, Andrea Messina is fabulous about supporting boards, so I encourage board members either to reach out and have a short conversation with Andrea Messina directly about what your interests are, or for Dr. Moore, who I know will interact with each of us around what we think are the priorities to bring them back to Andrea. But we can create what this looks like. There is no way, there isn't a curriculum, a rigid curriculum that we must follow on a particular topic. So, and there are a number of ways to do it. So I encourage new board members to reach out to Andrea Messina. You can always get her information from Nancy, but she's incredibly helpful and responsive. And to some degree, I think it falls on us, not necessarily Dr. Moore, to create what this workshop looks like.
You know, the one thing in listening the other day, when I was at college, I created a course in leadership and ethics. And there's been a lot written about leadership. The military's been studying it for hundreds of years and really still hasn't completely figured it out. But I thought one of the more interesting sessions from the conference last week was the lead-off one about trust. And I made a lot of notes. I usually don't make a lot of notes, but I made a lot of notes. And the last thing this gentleman said was, everything of value we have is built on trust. And I look at the 5 of us, and we all have different backgrounds. And you talk about relationships. If this were a corporate board, we would all come from different backgrounds. We would bring different experiences. We would have different functional expertise. And we would trust our fellow directors when speaking to a topic that we didn't know a lot about, but you were chosen, you're the expert, I'll defer. And I think that while we don't have the privilege of selecting each other, the community has done that. I think one of the things that we should strive for is developing trust in one another on topics where you know that you're better off deferring. And there's plenty of topics. I mean, you all have experience in the classroom, different ways. Principals, teachers, you teach a course now. I have a finance background, and I think if we can sort of figure out how best to rely on one another, not only will we learn how to trust one another, but that will contribute to the efficiency of meetings. And I think that's the value of this relationship building, which is hard when you can only meet in the public. And you got to be careful what you say. At any rate, I think we have a great opportunity here. And someone asked me, you know, and I think I said this to Dr. Moore. I mean, obviously, we want to improve the academic outcomes for the students in the district. That's why these kids go to school, and that's a big challenge. From my perspective, I would also like to have this district viewed as one of the best managed, quote unquote, managed districts in the state. And that all encompassing, it's not just how we deal with curriculum, how we deal with finances, how we fund the place when Tallahassee isn't as generous as we would like them to be, et cetera, et cetera. So I think all of this we can, with our backgrounds, can complement one another, and we can, you know, given a few months here, I think we can get a lot of good things done, and I think we can have some fun doing it. The fun being the satisfaction of knowing we've done the best we can, and it's recognized, hopefully, by our various constituents.
Yeah, I appreciate that you brought that up, because in that first session, that was actually one of my favorite things that he said. And I commented on it in the little chat there. That's been raised before among the board, and we haven't really had a good container for how to have that conversation and how to trust one another sufficiently to allow one another to shine in areas of expertise where other people feel like they want to have their hands in. So I actually completely agree with you, but I'm wondering how you envision or others envision a conversation about that going to carve out those areas. We've talked about it being along the strategic plan where there are conveniently 5 key areas. There are things that some of us are either have a history in, have experience in, or are more interested in than others. So to all my board members, does that happen in a master board training? Does that happen in a board discussion? Does that happen when we have these conversations? How do you envision that conversation going?
Well, I think just for example, I think having Terry on point, watch out for this, having Terry on point in dealing with this, what are our needs as an organization, both the staff and the board, from a consultant.
You're talking about legislative?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's an area that you may regret it, but you have expertise
regret it
and
last
a
year
lot
now.
of experience. I suspect that if in our individual meetings with Dr. Moore, we could maybe you could explore with each person, take the 5 elements to the strategic plan, and maybe, since we can't sit here and, which would be the most productive use of time, identify areas that you'd really like to be, quote unquote, the go-to person on the board for whatever it is. And see what information comes.
So to
comes back.
clarify, you're suggesting that Dr. Moore be the intermediary because we can't talk to each other, and that conversation happen offline. Following individual conversations with Dr. Moore, he bring it back to us for a conversation where the board will together say, yes, we agree with that, or no, we don't.
That's one way to do it, just as a suggestion. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. One of the things that board members, if you recall at our last meeting that we all agreed to was our board discussion sessions, that we were going to continue the board discussion sessions. And one of the things that we agreed to with our first upcoming board discussion session was to talk about this in particular. To kind of give the new board members a review of our FSBA training, what some of these policies are. To begin that kind of conversation, this is kind of like a beginning point, but then we can continue it during our discussion session, which is already on the agenda. I've already provided Nancy with some backup information that I think you all would be interested to receive. And of course, if other board members want to provide Nancy with items to add to that agenda. But I think that would be a nice place because that's exactly what it's for. It's for us to discuss and to begin that conversation, not just then and here and now, but on an ongoing basis. This is the conversation that we kind of need to have all the time because that's what building relationship is all about. That's what working together is all about. But on a more formal level, to kind of carve out those priorities for us and how that would look moving forward, I think if we continue with keeping the item on the agenda for our next discussion session, and at that time, maybe Dr. Moore would have more to provide during that time. If not, at that moment, then from there, maybe we can continue to move forward with, in agreement with, what we're going to do after then. But do we have a date for the next discussion session yet? No. Dr. Moore? We don't have that yet?
Should
Just
be,
curious.
I think, January 12th, but we don't have that on the calendar yet.
Not yet, right?
While you're looking for dates.
It's the second, whatever the
It'd be
second
the 12th.
Tuesday is, yeah.
Okay. Just to let you all know that I've already communicated with Nancy and with Mrs. Dr. Moore on that. And again, that came directly from our last meeting. So I think
Okay,
that that's a great
Dr.
place to
Jones.
start.
I think the master board training is where we really need to develop the agenda on what we need. We talked about where do we put this, what do we do, so let's use those 3 days to make sure they're efficient for us. And that, Mr. Barefoot, what you're talking about, that opening last week, it really was powerful. He talked about trust with clarity, competence, connections, and communication. We talk about this all the time as educators, the art and the science. The science is you better know your content. And here we have to do our reading, we have to be ready, we have to respond, and really know what we're doing. And then the art is how we connect with people. And every successful educator will have both of those for that balance, because even in high school, I'm telling you, if they don't like the teacher as much, they're not going to work as hard. So it's just something that we need to develop. But I think we really need to use that master board training to let Dr. Moore know what we need. What do we need to move forward and be efficient? Thank you.
Any further, yes?
Yeah, I believe we call that with-itness. And we used to actually have it on the evaluation part. Do you remember that? With-itness. With-itness.
Oh, with itness.
Anyway, since we're talking about FSBA and about policies and everything, I do need, couldn't talk to you about this, so I do think this is the perfect place to bring it up. I was asked to be a member of the FSBA Policy Committee. And what they're going to be doing, which it sounds like a little bit of work, is looking at all of their policies that haven't been reviewed in years and updating them, and restructuring and redistricting. I'm not sure how that works for FSBA, but they're looking at redistricting, so I'll let you know. But I'll give you guys, I think the one thing I was told is it's an advantage to be on there because you can kind of update your board and really understand what's going on before you're surprised by seeing it come forward. So I'll let you know what happens with this policy committee, but we're supposed to be meeting for the first time on Zoom in December. And then after that, we meet as needed. So I'll let you
Okay.
know. Okay?
Anybody else? Why don't, back to you, Dr. Moore, for the next.
Through the chair, what I will do is I will have Nancy survey the board to identify that initial date for the FSAB training, coordinate with them, and then begin to craft what that initial agenda would be. Push it out to staff. Push it out to you all for feedback, and then we come together that first day, create the agenda for days 2 and 3 to ensure that it is exactly tailored to our very specific needs that we will drive in the creation of that agenda. The next agenda item is policies. And what we've done this time is staff has had the opportunity to meet with each board member to review the policies under their area of supervision. Neola is an organization that works with us, many districts actually across the state of Florida, in ensuring that state statute as changes in law take place, that policies are aligned to those shifts and changes in practice. Once we receive that information from Neola, each cabinet member has the opportunity to work with the supervising staff to review that policy. We then coordinate with our school board attorney and Neola in review of those policies, really taking a deeper dive in terms of implementation. If law is changing and school board policy is changing, have we done the needed legwork in order to ensure systematically we're ready to implement? And this is very complex work. As you change a policy, it may require negotiations. As you change a policy, it may require organizational shifts or reallocation of funds. So there's a great deal of legwork and preparation in presenting these items to you. After we have met with the legal teams in order to ensure that we are vetted legally and that we are prepared to implement these particular policies, we then had the opportunity to present them to board members for their feedback and review. Dr. Jones, as you mentioned, this is one of the primary areas of responsibility of a school board. So the last hour and a half and the future conversation the conversation that we engage in now, very, very powerful work. So what I'd like to do to honor everyone's time is you all have had the conversation and dialogue regarding the policies that were presented to you. There is a plethora of policies that are being presented, but we would happily be able to respond, provide additional information, or answer any questions you may have for any of the policies that are being put before you this evening. And staff will be available to answer any questions.
Can you, is Neola an acronym for something?
Is it?
What is it, what is that, what is it?
I went to the website to find it out, and it's very difficult to find.
I mean,
No, it's just something I've dealt with for the last 15 years. I do not think it is, though.
but it's a policy-making, it's a policy-making entity,
So
organization?
many school systems, they craft policy. Now, they present that policy in alignment to each school board. So this policy, and we use a number of Neola policies that we review, we adapt or adopt the way that they are to ensure that we are compliant.
Through the chair, they also do 2 updates a year. They update all your policies for any state changes in law, and then also any federal changes in law. And then you work with their staff to incorporate the changes that will best reflect the operation of your district.
And are they independent? Are they part of the State Department of Education? Is it Florida-based? Is it?
They are an independent company. They are housed out of Ohio, and last check, I believe they did the same services for roughly 12 to 15 other states.
Okay. So they're, don't take this the wrong way, they're legit. I mean, this
Right,
is
yeah.
an organization
Yeah, they're
that's
legit.
viewed as
Yes.
so-called experts.
Very respectable.
Good, all right. Mrs. Rosario.
I just would like to add to that, other than the statutory, and when you hear, for the new board members, when you hear the recommendations coming forth with these new drafted policies, you'll hear from them whether these are drafted based on statute changes. If they are statutorily recommended for us, then we don't have a choice. We have to adopt them. But if they are not, then you, as board members, have the opportunity to change it. This is our job. So if there's something in here that you don't like, we let Dr. Moore and his team know, I don't like the wording on X, Y, Z. I'd like that to change so long as it doesn't conflict with statutory requirements. You have that right to do that.
Thank you. Sounds like you're the expert.
No. No, but I've been here 2 years. Yeah. But it's good,
You actually
that's
saw an
something that's
example
good
of
to
that.
know. Huh?
Yeah, you actually had an example of that at our first meeting when you brought up the policy on, for the ECGs. And I wanted to
Yes.
insert a word.
Yes, yes.
So they got to participate in that without really understanding kind of how that comes
Yeah.
about.
Well, I know in the briefings, I think when Mr. Meyer brought this up, maybe it was Mr. Bass, I guess, it was, we talked about in general all of these things, and you went through the, the 5 categories here. So I get it, but this was sort of all Greek
Yeah.
out of the chute for me anyways.
It's a stiff learning curve.
Dr. Schiff.
And also, just to be clear, these come before the board tonight not to vote on, but simply to set a public hearing. So all we're doing is reviewing now. These are what will go out to the public to review and will be approved a month from now.
Can I make another comment, too? There's a policy book, and I brought it up when I was a parent, actually, and I was able to use a policy, and parents do this all the time, so we need to be aware of this as board members, that if we set a policy, right, and you'll know this as a former principal, a parent will bring that policy to your office and say, I have the right to do X, Y, and Z because your policy
Right.
says so. And I actually brought a policy book with me one time because I was an administrator at the same time as a parent. Yeah, I told you this story, and I won't say names, but I brought it to an administrator that was working with my daughter because my daughter was being unfairly treated, I felt, because of a medical issue, and it was affecting her grades. And I was told, no, we can do whatever we want. And I said, nah, actually you can't, and here's why. And when I showed him the policy, they were shocked. So my comment to him was, our administrators should not be shocked by school board policies. They should know these. And you in your office somewhere have several of these looking
Yep.
books that are red and very thick. And you can also access the policies on our website. And Mrs. Esplin can show you how to do that so that you don't have to go through all these books. But it is important to know when a constituent calls you and says, I have a concern about X, Y, Z, sometimes I'll go and look at the policy before I call him. Because I want to know what do we have in policy so that when I have a conversation with the superintendent, I'm very versed on the policy
Right.
before I talk to him. So that's just a little heads up.
I liked your question on Neola. Neola used to be my middle name when I was executive director for secondary. Just kidding. Neola and I had issues. But anyway, talking about policy, and we've said it, Terry said it, everyone said it, I think our most important role is policy. And I got to give you a good example. When I was a high school principal, it was December of the school year. They changed unweighted grades to weighted grades in the middle of the year. Every one of my top 10 students' ranking changed. So we all thought it would be grandfathered in. It was changed immediately for everyone. I mean, and that just caused a hoopla. And I don't know, and I said this to the board at that time, if they knew what they were doing at that time to students and parents. 20 to 30 parents in my office the next day, valedictorian changed, top 10 changed, and we're talking about scholarships with this. So whenever we do set policy, and it's a lot of reading, and I've gone through it on the website, it's just so very, very important to watch what we're doing, because Ms. Berenborg's right. Parents will bring this to you. One thing I did talk to Dr. Moore about, because it was a concern when I was a principal, not the vaping, but the smoking. But I like how it's written as far as tobacco-free environment, because this is something obviously our high school students are dealing with, our high school principals, middle school principals are dealing with. So when we set these policy, obviously we have to have student safety at the utmost concern. But yeah, Neola is interesting. I'll share more with you someday.
And just as
In a
a,
public meeting.
Yeah, oh yeah, I know.
before Mr. Bass gives you the actual name of what Neola actually
Oh, you
stands
found
for.
it?
One of the organizational shifts that we took, I think policies kind of fell to the wayside or went to the specific cabinet member and brought forward for approval because that was the requirement. But on the back end of this work is implementation. And as many of you know who are occurring, one of the areas assigned to Ms. Dampier is to ensure that not only do we bring them to you and vet them with you and have them approved, but there's a leg of work for us, once they're fully approved over the course of, after the public hearing, that we follow through. That training for principals is provided. It's implemented throughout the district. If we're just changing policies without changing our action or behaviors, we're going to run into some problems. I can't say that organization, the full implementation was where it needed to be to give you all, as a board, the level of comfort, but I assure you that it is in place now. So, Mr. Bass.
And thank you. I just want to brag on my staff. They always listen in to make sure if there's any information I need. So Dr. Suit, thank you for sending me this. It is Northeast Ohio Associate. They began serving schools 40 years ago as an educational consulting firm.
What's the L stand for?
Language.
Oh, Language Associate.
And just a side note, the founder and owner I had worked very closely with, and he passed away this past September. And but his daughter is taking the reins, and they have attorneys in all those states that work through the different law changes. So everyone is an expert in their state.
Good to know. I knew it was an acronym. You couldn't have put those,
Yeah,
there's too many vowels in a row there to be anything but an acronym. All right. Okay, I think now an update.
Yes, thank you. What I would like to do now is to provide an update on our executive order as well as our health and safety measures. They coincide extremely nicely. As mentioned during the legislative updates, the state did provide Executive Order 2020-E07, which afforded us the opportunity to know how to proceed moving forward. The executive order really flows around 7 specific assurances that we will provide to the Florida Department of Education, remaining open, providing the full scope of services as it relates to ELL, IEP, support services for students, progress monitoring students, flexibility for charter schools, innovative learning models, support for non-active truant students, and continued professional development. So what does that mean for the school district of Indian River County? It means that we've met all the assurances required by the state, and they've been fully implemented months and months ago. We will continue to offer the 3 instructional models that we've been offering since the beginning of the school year. Parents are very excited to hear that. I think it's important to note we have been proactive from the very beginning. At the end of the first 9 weeks, we went from 62% of our students in school to 80% of our students in school. That's 1,800 students. At the driving force of that conversation was a desire to ensure that we were providing instruction for students that ensured that they had every opportunity to maximize their full potential. You may recall that conversation began at a board meeting where I was presenting our initial baseline data and sharing the concern of some students in models that were not meeting their academic need. We didn't wait for the state to tell us what to do 2 months later. We began to act and we began to implement our specific plan. It is a very intentional plan. One of the things that the state is requiring is a signed letter of acknowledgement when a student remains in an environment, virtual, transitional, in which they're not finding success. And speaking to a number of colleagues and friends throughout the state, they are running around to implement this plan. We have just a small pocket of students here in the school district of Indian River County who we are extremely concerned about. Those are students who are not that they're not active or not participating, but not finding success. One of our goals is to ensure that we are the district that has the fewest of these letters signed. And I think it was Board Member Schiff who had mentioned what are we doing in earlier conversations. Principals are working with families. One of the things that we have is to move from a virtual experience to a transitional experience, which provides that opportunity for students to have that direct instruction provided to them through a teacher. So principals are continuing to have those conversations now. We will continue to work with students who are not active and following up with the appropriate support or paperwork that needs to be completed to get children in environments in which they will be successful. Another area that we all should be proud of is the academic interventions that we began pushing out at the end of the second week of school. We called it A2, as I'm sure you're all aware of, accelerate or acclimate and accelerate. And the intention of that specific plan was to look at students who had been out of school since March 13th and then create opportunities before school, after school, Saturday school, to accelerate their academic performance. So in December, the time that we're currently in, that those students would be in a place that would be like as if COVID had never existed, that academic slide, that COVID slide, as well as the summer slide, that we acted in a proactive manner to offset that. We are in the process of assessing our children right now, so our principals can begin to problem solve that data and evaluate, A, how did we do in terms of closing those gaps and defining what needs to be done in the next semester. And we have been intentional in working with our principals to say, we're not going to ease into the 2-week holiday break. We're going to make sure we have the information that we need. So as we close out the school year, we can use that time where leadership teams can come together, define what has been successful in their school improvement plans, define what shifts in practice need to take place, and then begin to reevaluate the implementation of their A2 initiatives. Make requests for additional funding through Mr. Fagan's office to ensure when they go home. The best way to enjoy that 2-week break is to know exactly what needs to be done and how it's going to be done when students return to school. So we are in the process of putting those plans together right now and providing the support needed. Another area of the plan was professional development, and we were probably the only district in the midst of the COVID close down where we went through a 10-week series with our principals and assistant principals on the Florida leadership competencies. We wanted to be intentional with the time that we had in investing in them, knowing how complex this work would be upon their return. During the summer, we held our first virtual conference where we had each leadership team come to Storm Grove in our conference that we are now calling Reignite. And it was the opportunity to evaluate our new reality, to problem solve with teacher leaders and assistant principals to define our priorities going into the school day. We maximized the first 10 days of school in planning and preparation. We continue to conduct professional development and PLCs with our teachers in new models. We continue to work with our unions to identify where there may be concerns or where there may be opportunities to improve, and then we shift or modify as we move forward in that particular model. So as we close out and respond to the executive order, a acknowledgement for the proactive approach our principals and leadership team has taken, we are ready to respond to students in the new year in a very, very aggressive way. We will continue to have our doors for brick and mortar open. If a student would like to transition at any point moving forward, they will be afforded that particular opportunity. That's something that's in the executive order, but that's something that we would continue to do anyway. So we are ready for the second semester. And a lot of questions have taken place over the last several months about, is it safe to return to brick and mortar? And I think we know the answer to that question as evidenced by the data of 1,800 students returning. I can tell you as a board, my time has been dominated. If you ask me where I've spent the most of my time over the last 8 weeks, it has been around health and safety. It has been around COVID response, face covering research, and doing the work the board has charged me to do. And I think we are in a very informed place with a great deal of action taking place and a great deal of work still yet to continue. I've had the opportunity to meet with the Department of Health on a number of times. I've had the opportunity to, as a result of those meetings, we have shifted and modified how we're noticing as it relates to quarantines. And I'm going to talk about quarantines a little bit later. Leadership from this board has resulted in a face covering rights and responsibilities in which all principals have the opportunity to provide input being implemented in our schools right now, really to clarify our expectations that this board has as we implement something. And I referenced it early, creating a program, creating a plan is one thing, but being successful at implementation is where you see a positive impact in the lives of children. We continue to meet with our unions and create MOUs when needed to ensure that we have clearly defined the ground rules on how we're working through a pandemic. We've established quarantine advocates. That was a response. That was an opportunity for us as an organization to learn. And what we learned is that we need to be more proactive in following up with students who had unfortunately been quarantined by the health department to ensure that the work that is being provided is aligned to the standards, and if they need additional resources or support, that work will be provided. I had the opportunity to sit with our PTA presidents, seek input from them regarding possible next steps. I had the opportunity to sit with our pediatricians for a second time, and will continue to meet with them moving forward to get a local perspective as it relates to where we are with our face covering system and our health and safety department. We've also met with the legal counsel for the health department, really looking at, as directed by the board, to look at, are we in a place where the health department is overreaching as it relates to the to the quarantining, to determine what would be our next steps. Continue to reconvene our think tank. This is the group of organization, or not group, individuals throughout the community that I pulled together in April, I believe, really to begin the conversation and receive feedback. Teachers, parents, community members, all coming together to speak through how you organize and create a public school system in the midst of a pandemic. And then working with our health providers, our school nurses. We have done that as well, making sure that we're listening to them. They're operating 2 different health rooms in our schools now. They are first responders in our schools and dealing with our parents when it comes to COVID. Continued or created an ongoing opportunity to receive feedback from the health department. I've had the opportunity on 2 separate occasions to meet with the Student Superintendent's Advisory Council, really seeking specific information from them as it relates to COVID. And you look at COVID over the course of this school year, and there's been a lot of talk about Vero Beach Senior High School being a hot spot, and I thank each of you for your information that you provided and really stepping up and speaking truth to the reality of Vero Beach Senior High School, which is a very safe place to send your son or daughter as it relates to COVID, and collectively they are doing a great job of implementing. But when you look at the first 9 weeks of school, we had 7 staff and 34 students. And in the last 5 weeks, not including the week before Thanksgiving is probably the best way of looking at this, the 5 weeks prior to Thanksgiving, we had 27 staff and 56 students. So the feedback that I have received is that we are in the midst of an aggressive spike, and that we as a community need to continue to implement our health and safety measures and evaluate in a timely fashion. The work that I am committed to doing moving forward really is to reconvene with our pediatricians, reconvene with the health department, as well as our COVID-19 task force, to continuously assess the reality within our particular schools, and then make modifications or adjustments to our health and safety measures at the appropriate time. And that will be done through informing the board first and foremost. Following that, that would be a Facebook Live conversations, always, it doesn't need to be spoken, always preparing our principals to take any needed steps. I think this board could rest assured that we as an organization have led from the front in the midst of this pandemic. And when it comes to a health and safety measure or face covering requirement or walking away from it, we once again will be in the position of leading that particular work. So you can expect monthly updates from me, feedback from pediatricians, in order to ensure when the time is appropriate, when we're not in the midst of what is an aggressive spike, we can partner with the health department, we can partner with our pediatricians, I can partner with surrounding districts to create a vetted, organized process or path in order to move that particular work forward. Also want to provide an update for quarantines, and as you know, just last week, the health department or the CDC released information regarding quarantines. And we eagerly began to look for the information from our local health department on, hey, how fast can we implement? I was texting the chancellor, come on, let's get the information from the state, or push the state health department to give information to local health departments. We now have that information. So a typical quarantine prior to this new release was a 14-day quarantine from exposure. Now what the new practice will be is a 7-day, a 10-day quarantine with the opportunity to have a test done, a PCR test done on day 6, in being able to return as early as day 7 from that quarantine. Now, when you look at the actual days out of school, it is significant. You keep in mind that there are weekends included. So a typical quarantine for us is 7 to 10 days, because you go back to that initial exposure. So depending on when the student was exposed, the index, as Mr. Bass calls them, receives that information. We go back to those particular days. This is going to reduce from a 10 to 14 days being out of school to 6 to 10 days being out of school. So this is going to save a significant amount of time for students to be back in school. We are currently working with the students that are under the umbrella of quarantine right now to get them the information that they need. So if there's an opportunity for them to return early, then let's get them back in school. As we returned from Thanksgiving, last week was a very quiet week as it relates to COVID, but right now I would best describe us in a very, yet again, another aggressive uptick. We're working a number of cases right now based on the information that we're getting with our health department. So a lot of information being shared, a lot of aggressive work that has been done. This is a constant thing that we're going to have to address as we move forward. My assurances to you as the board, we continue to review and implement lead from the front, while at the same time making sure that we're doing the aggressive work that needs to be done to move the system forward. In the last couple weeks have been extremely encouraging to me as I have the opportunity to visit schools, as I have the opportunity to participate in principal professional development, as I have the opportunity to walk schools with principals and provide feedback to them on what we're seeing. There is a number of innovative projects that will be coming to this board in January and February. And those were the things that I dreamed of bringing, the impact of that work, honestly, when I came in January of last year. So we're beginning to get to the opportunity not only to manage through a crisis, but to design ourselves in a way to have that transformational impact that I promised this board that we would have. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yes.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for bringing this report to us. I know on October 13th, our former board voted to require the superintendent, we directed him to bring us, and I shall say it exactly from here, place a discussion item on this workshop to discuss the findings related to a review of the board-approved Safe at School reopening plan implementation and a plan to address the associated face covering requirements. I do understand, because of that second part of that, that we cannot discuss that because of pending litigation. So I appreciate the fact that you were able to give us the other information as well as you did. There were 2 items that were stated in the emergency order that I want to bring forward. One was the innovation on learning modality changes. So I believe we're already on the forefront of that. So I kudos to you for doing that. In other words, when a student is not doing well in one, like virtual learning or transitional learning, then they were being contacted and gently persuaded to change to coming into school or to do transitional. So I think we're kind of ahead of that curve, which is good. And then the other one was funding for growth is in there. So the question I have about that is, you know, a lot of districts, I heard about a lot of districts losing 7,000 kids and things like that. And I asked you, how many?
Well, the district I know the most about is 8,000.
8,000 now. Okay, so, and I'd heard from 7,000 from them. So the question I have is, and I asked you this question, and I know the answer to it, but would you tell us where we are as far as growth or loss?
I'll let Mr. Fagan expand, but as we were running through the return of students, that was probably one of the biggest things on my mind. And speaking to my counterparts across the state in districts of all sizes, the anticipated loss, unaccounted for students, each district calls them something different. When we looked at our enrollment, we were one of those districts the consultant was talking about that actually increased in enrollment. So what that means is the work that we did in communicating our plan, opening up our campuses, and communicating the options that we had available allowed a level of comfort for our students to return. That has not been the norm across the state. Now, so we're proud of that. Now, are we getting full funding for them is probably the question that you're really asking. We're not losing any money, but we're not necessarily getting full funding for all of those students as we offset the loss for the entire state. And Mr. Fagan, can you take us a little bit deeper on that?
Based upon preliminary FTE figures, which will be final come December 15th, that's when all your FTE for Survey 2 will be done. Right now, we are up. We are up above our projections, and therefore we should see a gain. But we have to wait to see how all the other districts fare with that, and we may see a proration of where we may lose dollars. You'll gain in FTE, but you won't get the full value. But you won't know that until everything is done on the 15th, and the DOE will go through that process, and we'll probably know about mid-January.
So again, we're one of those districts that's helping out other districts. I just want to state that.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, I will say that when I was in Tampa 2 weeks ago, and there was a news article done about how Hillsborough, I believe it was Hillsborough, it might have been a surrounding district, but they were literally going door to door looking for children. They were knocking on motel rooms. They were looking everywhere because they couldn't find children that were missing. They had a huge number that they were looking for. And it's scary because, you know, people aren't thinking about the fact that when kids are in school, right, adults are looking out for those kids. And those kids sometimes slip through the cracks. And if there's no trail behind them, then where are those kids? So I think, you know, how many of those kids do we have that we're looking for? That's my question.
Through the chair, we don't have a high percent at all of disengaged students, which is what other districts, meaning students that just did not show up. Now, we have probably 25 to 50 students that we're very concerned about not participating to the volume that they need to in order to be successful. And those are the ones in which we're working with right now to get them in a model in which they will find success. So I think a lot of the work that we did on the front end, transitioning from 9 weeks to the second 9 weeks, and immediately what I did is follow with principals and say, all right, what's your plan for students who did not move? And one of the things that we did is we just didn't draw a line in the sand saying it's brick and mortar or it's this. We were willing to look at parents who truly had a concern regarding health and safety and said, let's meet in the middle where we can give you a teacher through our transitional model for your core classes and begin to provide that direct instruction. And we've continued to grow in our virtual models where teachers have the opportunity to actually connect with interventions taking place. So some of that human contact or relationship building we began to enhance or accelerate over the course of the first semester. And when you start to build those relationships, even though they're over the computer, you get higher levels of participation. So by no means am I trying to say that it is no students. There are about 25 to 50 that we are working with to come to consensus with the families on how to implement a successful education for those children.
Okay, and may I ask one more?
Sure.
Okay. The other side of that is, and this was an example in our ethics training that I just recently listened to, what if we have a disengaged teacher? So I have heard about possibly, you know, a teacher's not used to teaching this way. And maybe some are doing an outstanding job and providing lots of follow-up activities and the kids are really engaged. But then we have that other side. How are we kind of jumping into those classes and seeing what's going on to make sure that children are getting the high level of instruction that we're hoping to give them?
Well, Maybe I'll let Mr. Meyer jump in, but let me acknowledge the work of him and his team, Ms. Becerra specifically, as well as another of individuals, really providing PLCs for those teachers, getting that information, working with our principals to ensure that we are doing just that, connecting, progress monitoring, looking at the data, looking at the percent students are moving along specific courses, and getting that information and then following up. And the truth of the reality is we've learned a lot. And some of the things that we did from the first 9 weeks to the second 9 weeks as it relates to student assignments or as it relates to the number of students teachers had. I don't think it's a secret that we had to relook at that and pull students away or set new criteria as it relates to student-teacher ratios in those virtual models. Also continuing to listen and learn. One of the things that we're doing is reassigning some students who still need to complete coursework for the first semester. We want teachers to continue along the path and teach the content for those students while we have students coming back into the brick and mortar. That is something different. They just need to make up assignments to bring their grade up. So we're going to pull those students and take that burden on in a significantly different way, so we're not overburdening our teachers. Mr. Meyer, anything you?
I would just add, you said it, but the teachers deserve a lot of credit. They've done a phenomenal job learning things rapidly, just as fast as everybody else. That I can't thank them enough. Actually, what we consider to be our virtual for elementary, the work at your own pace, that group of ladies, they're all ladies, it's about 12 teachers. They meet weekly, and they've really moved their virtual work at your own pace to almost be a transitional. They're doing weekly check-ins with the students, live teaching. So it's phenomenal to watch that grow and develop. The teachers that are doing the pure transitional that are at the schools, we've walked through their classrooms. It's been fun to go into a classroom that's empty and get to watch that teacher teach live. Those are interesting things that 12 months ago, you wouldn't have thought that you would have been able to do. It is a little more difficult to, as you asked the question, to sort of insert yourself or monitor or gauge what's going on in a classroom that's being conducted by a teacher who may be on FFCRA accommodations is teaching from their house, but that occurs as well. So there is an opportunity for the coaches or for the principal to join that as a team's call and to watch the participation of the students and the direct instruction of the teacher. But I'll tell you that it happens just naturally, just like a normal walkthrough of we're walking through the classrooms. What's in that class? Oh, that's Dr. Jones. She's teaching transitional right now. Let's go in and take a look at it. And you just walk in just like you normally would any sort of informal walkthrough to check up on what's going on. So the teachers have done a great job of learning and growing. I think they would tell you, if they're being honest about a self-assessment, some of them still have room to grow. It is difficult to learn a new skill and to master new software platforms, and some of them, I think, in the surveys have been honest in that they want more support, and we're attempting to give that to them through these weekly PLCs, the monthly professional development offerings that we have. But we all begin with different competencies on the journey, and so I wouldn't say that anybody's given up, even though they recognize that they have room to grow. They haven't thrown in the towel, and they're not saying, I can't do this. They're just saying, let's keep supporting this so I can improve. So it's been great.
Dr. Jones.
First of all, Kristen, thank you for all the updates with COVID. I really appreciate that. I look at it very closely, and it's just really great information. Dr. Moore and staff, thank you for being proactive with everything with COVID. Probably the most challenging year public education has seen in a long, long time. But the staff and student safety is paramount, absolutely paramount, so I appreciate that. To the district and the principals and the teachers who are dealing with all of this from March on through right now, I just want to say thank you. I think you answered this, but those students who started out with Edgenuity and 9 weeks, they went back to brick and mortar, they have through the semester to finish that, correct, for Edgenuity?
Through the chair, the answer to that question is yes. Mr. Meyer, you want to take us a little bit deeper on that?
Good. Through the chair, we were able to modify the semester Edgenuity to just make it be the semester's worth of work, so they can go back and do that. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Sarhel.
Thank you. Dr. Moore, I have a couple of questions about the executive order. In the executive order letter G, under innovative learning modality, something that is mentioned there midway through that paragraph states, in order for a student who is not making adequate progress to remain in the innovative learning modality, the district or charter must, and then there are two kind of numbered bullets there, provide written notice to the parent, of course, for regarding students who are at risk, and then two, obtain written acknowledgement from the parent or guardian verifying the receipt of that information. But that last sentence is pretty interesting, and it leads into H, which is that we do not have, and I just want to make this statement specifically for parents who are listening, that we do not have a right to kind of coerce a parent to switch from virtual to brick and mortar if the parent doesn't want to, even if the child is not succeeding in that environment. So that's what H states, that school districts and charter schools must not unreasonably restrict the decision of the parent, that essentially, the choice of the parent, the right of the parent to choose the educational setting that he or she wants is in their purview. However, with that said, we encourage parents, we don't force them, correct?
You are correct. I don't think in public education, collecting get-out-of-jail-free cards is the way to educate children. When student is not finding success, they're not finding success. And we're willing to problem solve with those families to find an environment in where they can find success. So creating and complying with the letter is one thing, but the intent or my desire is to ensure that we are finding environments because of the transitional that we have created. We can, in fact, if we're willing to problem solve, find solutions where everyone is comfortable. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. I'm still in the same area here at the end of G, students that are transitioned out of the innovative learning modality based on this requirement must be given additional interventions. Could you speak a little bit about what those additional interventions are and how quickly is the turnaround once a student re-enters? How quickly is that turnaround? And then I have a follow-up with regard to the virtual.
All right. So when a student returns, and I'm going to be very, very honest, we began this, as I said during my presentation, during the second week of school, asked principals to begin to identify additional time before school, after school. We asked them to create that pathway forward. If additional funding would be required, Mr. Fagan would support that model. So we have schools providing Saturday academies. We have school who have students staying after school to provide those interventions for our students. So when a student comes back in, we're conducting that initial assessment that we use, whether it's iReady when they initially were coming back, or internal assessments and progress monitoring data that we use throughout the year to define the gap, as well as teachers' recommendations. And I think that is probably a big driving force. Teachers who have a high skill in teaching specific grade levels know exactly where they should be and when they should be there. And one of the biggest frustrations that we experienced that second 9 weeks, because we did bring back so many students, was I have two different sets of kids. I have kids who are right on track because I've had them in my grasp all school year, and then I have a group that just came in. And really providing those A2 initiatives help bring those other students back to where they need to be. Is it right where we would like it to be? The answer is no. But we're right where we want to be in re-advising those plans to continue that pathway moving forward. Mr. Ma, you want to speak specifically about some of what the actual interventions would be? Because I think that's kind of what you were asking as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I mean, The reality is, with the innovative learning options, with Edgenuity, those interventions, that intensive reading program is not as strong as what we can do face-to-face. And so we have developed a very rigorous intensive reading plan via our district K-12 reading plan that is going to enable our students to get a much better targeted intervention to their need. We have, of course, encouraged the students to participate in things like iReady online from the house, but the reality there is that that level of fidelity of that assessment is not as good as what's being done in the classroom. So one of the first things we want to do is to do a diagnostic of what the students' needs are and then get them enrolled into one of those intervention programs immediately. As Dr. Moore said about the A2 interventions, another great thing that every school did was they created after school, or before school, Saturday school, a lot of other opportunities. A number of our schools have the Moonshot Academy. There's just so many things going on at school. And so getting the students plugged in with all the different opportunities that are there is going to be a significant benefit to those students. I mean, we can keep pumping online programs at them, but that's what's not successful for some of these students. That's the exact reason why they're not being successful. Sitting in front of a screen for 8 hours a day is not the modality that some of these students are finding success with. So we have so many different variety of interventions that they will get hooked up with.
Thank you for that. Just my last comment, if you don't mind, with regard to professional development and still piggybacking off of these interventions and the instructional and the instruction that we're providing for the students. In the virtual model, and this is Dr. Moore, we've talked about this, Mr. Meyer, we've talked about this. I have not really talked about this with the board members, but if a parent insists on having their child in virtual, and that student currently is not succeeding in the virtual model, I come back to, what are we doing about that? What are we doing about that? I know that the virtual model, the way that it is now, is not how it was originally implemented last spring, for example. And even last year, we had very few students in the virtual school or the virtual platform. And now, we went from, 25 to like 2,500. So it's a very, very different atmosphere. It's a very different, what we're facing in the community is very different. But instruction isn't. And so part of my hope and what we've talked about is not just issuing or giving opportunities for professional development for our brick and mortar schools, but to also focus on the virtual school so that we can grow it to capacity. We have an opportunity here to take the virtual program that we have and really beef it up, tenfold if we could, so that we can say that it is competing with all of the other virtual schools that have been up and running for years and years and years. We have $1 million also that just came in from the county commission, which were COVID relief funds given to the district, and I'm grateful for that. And for those who are listening, thank you for that. And I know that we have, based on what my understanding is, that we've kind of dog-eared those funds to kind of pay ourselves back for some of the monies of the PPEs that we've already spent. However, we still have this virtual world that what are we doing with it, right? How are we growing? And it's not just, and this is the other thing that I'm going to kind of mention, is that I think as a district, we need to kind of identify at some point, what is our virtual school going to look like in terms of the instruction? And maybe we haven't had that conversation. I don't know if that's a conversation that the board makes or that you make as the superintendent. Is it going to be completely student student-led, where the students walk through, all of the modalities that are in Canvas, for example, and then the teacher serves as a facilitator? Or is there going to be direct instruction within the virtual program, or is it going to be a little bit of both? And those are sort of the things that if we don't identify and we just kind of say, well, we're just going to have virtual, and we just kind of throw it out there as just an option, and if it doesn't work out for you, then we'll put you in brick and mortar. I don't want that. I don't want us to have a virtual. I want us to be firm in how we're going to deliver the instruction in the virtual world, in this virtual model, and moving forward. Maybe you can talk about our goals in that and how we're going to build capacity in the virtual school, because we have an opportunity here, not just for our own students, but we have an opportunity also for those who have moved out of the district now because of COVID and wanted to completely full-time homeschool. We have an opportunity to bring them back. What are we doing in this world here, Dr. Moore?
All right, so let me answer all of those questions. So students who are disengaged, who are in environments where they're not finding success, we're very few of those students have not, to this point, been willing to move from the virtual model into the transitional, with some of them having that actual transition taking place as we move into the next school year. If we continue to find students, whether it is in virtual or transitional, who are not finding success and just, hey, give me the letter, let me sign it and go about your business, if they're not participating, they're not attending, it's our responsibility to go through and work through what most districts call a truancy packet, which is the opportunity to move to a higher level of accountability to ensure that the parent is working with us and the child to access their education. So the same holds true whether you are in the schoolhouse or whether you are in home. That is a last resort for us, but it is an obligation for us to fulfill when we can't connect or engage with those particular students. That's the first part of your question. The second part of your question is absolutely spot on. And coming from a large district, the course offerings that we're able to provide students, because there are so many people and so many schools, is absolutely, every course is at the child's fingertips. Now, with what we have learned over the course of this year, we can bring that same reality here to the school district of Indian River County. Every single student will be accessing education as they graduate online, whether it is a professional certification that we're all having to take to renew certificates, whether it is online schooling. It is something we need to prepare our students for. And we have really, over the course of this year, invested in teachers to become experts. So the answer to your question is we're going to create something that doesn't exist. And it's just not going to be a sit back and wait for students to come in and do virtual because they want to stay home, but a true blended approach where children have the opportunity to pick their pathway through their education and access different courses in different modalities moving forward. And how a child accesses a course at Vero Beach Senior High School on one choice. They may have the opportunity to take that course virtually on campus, or opportunity to take the absolute best teacher and let them teach that course where their pass rate is 97%. Why don't you do it virtually at both schools or both high schools? Or that algebra teacher who is just absolutely changing the lives of children and we can do that too. So we have to think about how we're organizing ourselves significantly different. And that is one of the best things that we can do, is make this problem our friend. Don't let this crisis go by without us leveraging the opportunities to do things different. And those are some of the shifts that we need to ensure happens. And I've said it from the very beginning. If at the end of COVID, whenever that may be, if we look back and say, well, thank goodness, we all got through that as best we could, let's go back to normal, man, we failed kids. We need to look completely different, how we teach, how we engage, how we use time. I would challenge the state, how they fund us needs to drastically change as well. And just having seat time be a prerequisite for funding is an old, broken model. So there's talking about legislative priorities. There are a number of innovative projects, as I've referenced earlier, that will be coming to you over the course of the incoming year. And that will be one of those priorities on how we're going to leverage what we have invested in ourselves to be more effective investing in children.
Thank you.
Dr. Schiff.
I hope this is quick, because I know we're at time. And I think this is sort of for a combination of everybody, but probably mostly Mr. Meyer. Oh, Mike, it's on, but I'll just closer. Okay. You referenced in regard to both in-class and virtual models and the transitional model doing walkthroughs. And I know that while on the one hand, that really helps us as administration understand, or helps administration understand what's happening and what's not in the classrooms. The other side of that I've heard is that it is hard on teachers, that they're feeling a tremendous amount of pressure because while the walkthroughs, as we've spoken about before, are well-intentioned with the idea of how do we do this better, often they're perceiving it as surveillance. And so I'm wondering how, as we move forward in this in a way that, while simultaneously engages both the teachers and the students, because I know the object, of course, is engagement, right? It's not simply surveillance. But I know that teachers who are, in effect, kind of our frontline workers on this, right? So things come down from the state, they come down to administration. We are responsible for certain metrics and certain outcomes which are tied to resources. And the people who are most responsible for fulfilling on that, sort of who it all filters down to, is the teachers. And they're feeling a tremendous amount of pressure about that, which I hear periodically from those who are willing to share their experience. So can you speak a little bit about how we are interacting in a way that feels sort of encouraging and supportive to teachers doing this essential work without feeling like we're overseeing and we're surveilling and we're putting pressure on, because really it is down, our success is down to them, is down to what happens in the classroom in whatever modality that classroom experience occurs. And they feel it. They feel it really hard this year. So can you speak a little bit about how that's been addressed?
I'll start, Mr. Meyer. We'll bring us home. One of the first things that we did is work with our union to say this is going to be a hold harmless year. And we know the struggles in which you're going to engage in, as are we. And we don't want you worried about that, that evaluation or that student outcome. But in exchange for that, let's explore and create environments in which we could drastically support one another in providing quality instruction to students. And as you were speaking, the first word that came to my mind was trust. It was trust. And I assure you, in doing this work, and not to toot my own horn, but doing this work in extremely powerful, transformational ways, the foundation of that success is trust. And when we walk those classrooms, the conversation isn't on it isn't on the teacher. It's on the systems of support that surround that classroom. And the only way to move a district to empower students to maximize their full potential is to provide the highest level of support for them to do what is the most complex work. So when we're walking through, we're stepping out and we're saying, what support has been provided to that teacher? Are we seeing evidence of that support? what resources are being needed. So it is a problem-solving process on what we can do to improve the quality of instruction. It is listening, it is creating environments where, because everything is new, and I get it, not only is COVID new, I'm new. And the volume of individuals going into your classroom, I assure you, is more than it has ever been. But we won't have a district of intimidation. We won't have a district of I gotcha. We will have a district of let's engage and connect and stand shoulder to shoulder in doing this complex, hard work.
Can I follow up? How are we making sure that that's what's happening and that's the experience teachers are having? Because often what happens, either from what I know from what's happened in the past or things that I may currently hear, there is a, I'm measuring my words here. What you hear may not always be the experience that, and I'm going to call them frontline workers for the moment because they're, you know, they are our street level people, and there's all kinds of literature on that, which I won't go into. How are we ensuring and following up to make sure that what they're experiencing is a culture of support rather than a culture of gotcha or surveillance?
Live, eat, breathe, and drink in schools. And if I heard it once, I probably heard it 15 times. I've never had the superintendent in my classroom. So I'm just not talking about it. I am walking the walk. Same thing holds true with principals, walking with them and creating feedback loops that aren't singular in process. So if I was to receive all of my information just from principals, it's going to be filtered. Principals, my dad was a principal, I was a principal, best job I ever had. But when you're talking to your supervisor, things kind of get filtered because you're talking to your supervisor. So intentional opportunities. I had the opportunity with Mr. Bass and Mr. Meyer, 2.5 hours with the executive board of our teachers union. What's working, what's not working. And, you know, we heard some hard things and some things that I probably didn't like to hear, but that be the truth. And then we respond to that particular truth. Mr. Myers had the opportunity to respond and feedback on some of those things. So it's being intentional of creating how I'm going to receive the information and respond to it in a way that's going to prove academic outcomes. So it is intentionally creating opportunities to receive that feedback. It is sitting with my cabinet and evaluating them on how they're doing their work. It's evaluating principals on the academic outcomes. It's aligning the priorities in the organization and being truthful and honest enough to have the conversations about where we need to be to move them. So it is a constant presence in schools in listening. And I can tell you wholeheartedly, in some ways, and I've told this to my team, talking about over-speaking, some of the rub, I would want there to be more, because it means we're really having the dialogue and conversations. And because of COVID, we're probably not. But that support and push and coming together around the expectation really is where the rubber meets the road. And as we create those relationships, and being timid at the beginning is fine. But in walking this path before, I know at the end of the day, when you look back, they're going to say, yep, that the persons who weren't doing it right, we found them some other place to be, whether it be with this district or somewhere else, or not at all with this particular district. But those who don't uphold the expectation and the process how the work's going to be done, they ain't going to do the work here.
You wanted to follow up?
Yes, please.
Can I add one thing, Dr. Moore? So one thing specifically that has been done to address that concern is that there are different tools that are used for the different types of walkthroughs. So we have the evaluation rubric tool that Dr. Moore mentioned they'll be held harmless for, but that's not the tool that's used when we just do principal learning walks, right? The idea of a principal learning walk is to go into the class, not judge the teacher, but just look for the language that is used and say, are we hitting the rigor of the standard? That's it, right? Did you see it? Did you see the right text being used? Did you see the right questions being used? We go back in the hallway And it's not a gotcha, it's yes, no, why not? It's an observational thing, we can check on each other, and that is de-identified. We don't say that that's Dr. Schiff and Ms. Rosario, and we go back, we put it on a wall somewhere, and on those learning walks, and we're comparing people who does and who doesn't do it. All that's de-identified with no teacher names, just looking for specific things that are not the same rubrics that are used at the time of the evaluation, which would be held harmless. But I would say the teachers, it's interesting, I understand that some teachers are nervous this year, but that's because they want to do a good job. And that I think really needs to be the highlight of this, is that it's not that they're afraid of administration in all instances, maybe they are in some, but they care so much about the kids, they don't want to fail the kids, and they just are nervous about doing their very best. But there are teachers groups that want us in their classrooms. The last round of principal learning walks that we just did in December at the secondary level was the CTE classrooms. And they said after the first round of impact reviews, you didn't come into our classrooms. You only went to the math and science and ELA classrooms and looked at the tested grade levels. Why didn't you come into ours? We want you in our classrooms. And they were so excited to see us. We went into the classroom, and it didn't seem as though, you know, they didn't want us there. They're afraid of administration. They wanted to showcase their programs and how great a job they were doing. So while I understand that there is some nervousness in some instances about performance, because of obviously the uncertainty that surrounds us right now with the pandemic, many of our teachers are embracing, as Dr. Moore said, the opportunity to showcase what they're doing, and they want the feedback. They'll oh, I'm so excited that you're here. You know, can I get some feedback of what you saw? I'm like, I'm not here to judge you. We're just walking through to look at the curriculum or to look at something else. And and we do have teachers that they're really just craving that feedback. So it is creating an opportunity where we feel comfortable sharing with others. Through the history of education, most teachers have been in those four walls in that room without anyone coming in. Whereas other organizations, Mr. Barefoot, I mean, you can speak to this, it's very transparent in what you do, right? I mean, right now, we are on TV. Everyone gets to watch me speak, and they can play it back 1,000,000 times and poke holes in it. That is something you have to learn to adapt to, and not everyone is comfortable up on that stage, and that's just a level of comfort that we can help build our teachers and the faculty to understand why we come into the classrooms and what purpose it serves. But I do believe the instruction will greatly improve the more comfortable we are with speaking to where we have areas of need for support. So,
And I'll stop because I know Mrs. Rosario has a question. Thank you, because yeah, being on camera every time you open your mouth is definitely challenging.
Right.
It took a while to get used to that. And I appreciate your responses and the context in which they occur, and I want also to just continue to emphasize that this year is not like any other year. So on top of feeling, I mean, we all know that obviously, stating the obvious, but on top of shifting the culture to the work the walkthroughs and the oversight is to the engagement. They also, they're walking into classrooms every day worried about who's wearing the mask and who's not and who's arguing. Like this year, COVID is making just doing the day-to-day job so much harder. That on top of that while it may not be the intention, there is a certain pressure that gets felt because the job is not normal this year. And I want us to be attentive to that and sensitive to that, while alongside all of the laudable goals that you have in improving the work that we do. But it sits inside this context of an unbelievably challenging year for people who have to walk into that classroom every day. And, wonder if their kid is sick or they're going to get sick or, all of that stuff. And I just want us to be mindful of that.
Thank you. While I appreciate Dr. Schiff's voice and advocacy for the teachers who are feeling weary or leery about the walkthroughs, to a certain extent, I appreciate possibly even more the fact that we hired an instructional leader, not an instructional manager. And one of the things that we collectively agreed on was that we needed a superintendent who would get down into the schools, into the classrooms, and observe and do these walkthroughs. We've had these conversations because they are critical. When you are, as an assistant principal, when I was an assistant principal, When walkthroughs were just beginning, it was a little uncomfortable for people for a while because they didn't know if you were coming in as, an informal observation or a formal observation or a walkthrough, because there were 3 different types at the time. And I get that. But then after a while, once it becomes culture and it becomes regular and you're used to people coming in and out of your classroom, it really doesn't affect your work. You feel comfortable with it because you know that that's the culture of the school, and that's the culture of the administration, and of course the district, and in this case, our new superintendent. So if we didn't have COVID, Dr. Moore would have been in the classrooms long before, I'm sure. I'm sure of it. I'm sure he was itching to get into the classrooms because I know that because we've had conversations about that. I appreciate walkthroughs. You get a lot of information about walkthroughs. And my question, though, with regard to the walkthroughs are, and I understand that you said hold harmless, MOUs have been written and agreed upon with the union rep, is what you said regarding the hold harmless situation. However, what if you find something totally egregious, which I know we're not going to have here in this district, but if there's something of concern, of great concern, how do you handle that? That's more out of a curious, I don't want to really spend a lot of time in that, but how do you handle that, especially during this time of kind of understanding what walkthroughs are, as we were just discussing?
If we do find something totally egregious, we do have the opportunity to enforce that. So it's not, even though the whole harmless stigma is there, obviously if there's documentation, there's been efforts to improve the behavior and the methods, and it's still not occurring, yes, it can be, they can be evaluated lower.
Improvement plans still happen, professional practices or behaviors outside the classroom that when we follow up in an aggressive manner.
Yeah.
In terms of your evaluation and the academic outcomes, that's the area where we're holding harmless. And what we're going to see is better instructional outcomes as a result, because a higher willingness to engage in innovative new things that ultimately allow us to be in a better place to educate children in today's world.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure.
I certainly had some challenging years in education. I was in education for 35 years, but I can't imagine a year like this. But I do know when I was a teacher and had the support of administration, and when I was an administrator and had the support of the district, and I knew that it was okay to make mistakes, learn from them, move on, and grow, I knew things would be okay. And as long as we have that trust, we'll be okay. Thanks.
Right. Well, that was a good discussion, and as you said, it is a year like never before, and hopefully never again. But through times like this, you actually have the opportunity for, as unfortunate it is the challenges create opportunities, and the teachers will become better teachers. The students will, instead of sit on their phones to play games, they'll actually know that there's value to receiving information through electronic means. So there will be a lot of good over the long term come out of this. There's nothing else that I'm aware of on the agenda.
I'm sorry, that completes the presentations. So I'm done.
Yes, you were.
Yes,
You
sir.
get to do some of this again
Hey.
in about an hour and 40 minutes. If there's nothing else, meeting's adjourned, and we will see you all at a little before 6 o'clock. Thank you, everybody.